Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. There's a respite. I don't know how long that respite is going to last. My rage right now is off the charts. I'm sorry, I'm in a very shitty mood. This has been going on all morning. I bitched about it to the host. I uploaded audio clips so they can hear it of the drilling that's right above your head first thing when you wake up in the morning. Um, we'll see. I just outrageous. Like the notion that you book an Airbnb and they don't put that shit in the listing. Hey, by the way, we're doing construction at this particular Airbnb. Outrageous, outrageous. Um, serenity now, serenity now. I'm going to try to let that go. I'm going to bring in my guests, and I'm going to let him do most of the talking because I have no idea when that's going to restart. Um, Arnaud, welcome to the show, man. I have been dealing with construction all morning. There was a monologue that I wanted to get through that was impossible to get through. I don't know how long we're going to get a moment of respite. So thank you for joining me. You doing okay this morning?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jamal?
I'm okay. Arnaud Delvary, I'm sorry, Deverlay. He is an author, political analyst, and international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His latest book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of America Political Consensus or American Political Consensus. Arno, I put you on because there are a few things that I'm fascinated by. I have this hypothesis, and I want you to correct me on this hypothesis, whether I'm right or not, that Dmitry Medvedev really is the point of view of the Russian government. That Putin is the velvet glove. He is the political person. He is the person that gives you the language that you need in order to kind of be a salve, especially to face to the world. But if you want to know the real thinking and real thought process, Medvedev is your guy. Medvedev came out, and by the way, the phone call with Putin, as I pointed to the audience, there was no give in that phone call. Putin gave nothing that he hadn't already offered, meaning the ceasefire. Yeah, we'll accept the ceasefire providing it's on our terms. Hey, yeah, we'll have a conversation with Ukraine. We wanted to talk to them anyway. They broke off conversation. Medvedev came out and gave this speech, though, and I want to get your take on this speech.
Но нужно помнить, что для киевского режима есть и другой путь, о котором тоже неоднократно говорилось. Это путь безоговорочной капитуляции. Такая формула мира в международном праве тоже существует. Если сказать прямо, многим в нашей стране она нравится куда больше.
Pointing out, like, look, you have two paths. And I listened to the other parts of the speech, but he's pointing out you have two paths. You can either accept the deal, a peace terms, where we can come to sit at the table and come to terms, or you can accept unconditional surrender. Those are your only two options. There's nothing in between, meaning there is no magical door in this process. We will prosecute this war until you capitulate, or we could come to terms. Is that the real point of view of the Russian government? And to be honest, that doesn't really deviate from what Putin has been saying either.
All right. Well, there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, yeah, let's examine who Medvedev is. Medvedev was the president of the Russian Federation from 2008 to 2012. And as some of our listeners might recall, it was during his term that the Russian Federation was somewhat, I would say, hoodwinked into endorsing a UN resolution in the context of the Libyan crisis, which basically, to make a long story short, ended up the content of the resolution, which was calling at the time for a no-fly zone over Benghazi in order to protect some of the alleged victim of the Gaddafi regime. That resolution was completely denatured, completely deformed in order to justify the extension of this no-fly zone all the way to Tripoli. with the results that what we ended up getting was a regime change. And we all recall the former head of state of this country being dragged into the streets without any form of due process, and even less so of a trial. One has to remember that in as far as Russian politics is concerned, this at the time Putin was prime minister, and so he basically didn't have a say in administering this crisis. But we know that he was really, I think, with Gaddafi, he was really close to to make sure, and that's something that he really, I guess, generated reproaches towards Medvedev for his handling of the Libyan, basically, scam. I don't recall if the Russian Federation either voted in favor of Resolution 1973 or if they just merely abstained. But in the end, if it was a mere abstention, that allowed that resolution to pass. And the rest, as we know, as we say, is history. So this is something that Medvedev has had a lot of trouble to live down ever since. And we can assume that ever since 2011, 2011, I mean, so March 2011, April 2011, but more specifically October, with the downfall of Gaddafi's regime, Medvedev has been somewhat, I wouldn't say the doghouse, but, constantly attempting to mend, and to kind of reinvent himself, and so that opportunity came with the Ukraine conflict, obviously, and we now have, because Medvedev, you have to understand, what's considered like a pro-Western, somewhat of a easy to get along type of guy in the West. In any event, if we recall the reaction in the mainstream media, in the Western mainstream media in 2012, when Putin came back as president, and how they were somewhat, horrified. It's like party is over. The parenthesis is closed. You understand how much Medvedev had been somewhat deemed a what Margaret Thatcher used to say about Gorbachev, someone with whom we can do business. Well, that man is gone. This is not this is not likely to be the same person, politically speaking, ever again, because he was basically, that was a lesson that he never forgot, and that probably almost cost him his political career if it wasn't for the closeness that he had with Vladimir Putin. So let's get back now to his address. This was at the, by the way, International Legal Forum in St. Petersburg. Medvedev is a lawyer by trade. He's also the head of a foundation which is called the Plav Fund Foundation, which is a foundation that basically specializes in providing legal assistance to Russian citizens who are framed in legal procedure abroad. So what we had here as an kind of an introductory address from Medvedev was basically hello?
No, I'm here. I'm listening.
Oh,
yeah, I'm
okay.
listening. I have it on mute because they're doing construction, and I don't want the construction to bleed into the show. Yeah.
Okay. No, because your image just froze here. You're frozen, and so am I. So just like, okay.
So well, I'm not showing you it's frozen on mine, and I don't know if the audience sees it. That may be on your side.
Yeah, I guess. So anyway, so that basically, this explains, if not in part, or if not in all, at least in part, how Medvedev now considers international relations, and especially how he considers, the West. How should we trust the West and by extension its proxies. And so to the extent now in the conflict pertaining to Ukraine, we've had Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Istanbul 1.0, and now we're seemingly initiating what could be an Istanbul 2.0, already characterized by a lot of interference emanating from Kiev, with basically someone who says that he's willing to engage in peace talks, but at the same time he's calling for more sanctions. So that gives you everything. And when you want to talk peace, the last thing you're going to do is demand more sanctions against Russia, and insisting on a ceasefire before any kind of framework is decided. To the extent that your own army is really looking washed up by now, and you could use a 30-day ceasefire to, if anything, at least regroup, if not allow weapon shipment to get where they're supposed to go and reposition everybody and try to prolong the conflict. So Medvedev, obviously, we're like 12 years down the can now. He's a matured politician, and he understands. More importantly, he understands whom he's dealing with. And so, in the light of what we've seen emanating from Kiev, someone like Medvedev, basically says, we can either get it done, properly. We can pick up where we left off, plus 2 regions, obviously, in March, April 2022. We are ready for this. We've always expressed our desire to, negotiate. We have always extended our hands to do so. But to the extent we get the feeling that it's one more merry-go-around, which is not going to amount to anything, we have contingency plans, which basically will see us pursue to its logical end what was started on the 24th of February 2022. And if we are coherent, this basically can lead to an unconditional capitulation, in which case there won't be anything left to discuss, any kind of behavior or body language to analyze. The outcome of the conflict will be decided by and large on the field, on the ground. So that basically is something that is an expression of what everybody in the Russian Federation can agree on. This is a shared, pretty much, he expressed very much the consensual approach, in as far as the Ukraine conflict in general, and the Istanbul 2.0 in particular.
So yeah, it's funny. But the argument that he's making there is united. That's not any different than what is coming out of Putin, what came out of the Putin-Russian phone call, Putin-Trump phone call, or what Moscow has been saying. He just says it more brutally. He just says it quite out loud. We can solve this on the peace table, or we can solve this on the battlefield. This is your last chance. There will be no other chances for this. Either we get the 4 regions, next time it's going to be 8, meaning he is saying effectively, meaning everything coming out of Russia is consistent. That's the point that they're making. It may be put and couched in a certain way, let's say when Putin's saying it, but there's no deviation from this. The government is consistent in regards to what they're effectively saying. And I want to add something else to this. So in the phone call with Donald Trump, more details have been released. Axios is reporting that European leaders were just aghast at what they heard from Trump when he called after the fact in order to talk to Putin and the European leaders. And what it came across to them was that Donald Trump was effectively pulling away. It says, I think something's going to happen, and if it does, I just back away, and they're going to have to keep going. Again, This was a European situation. It should have remained a European situation. This is what Trump told reporters after the conversation. When he was talking to European leaders, however, the White House told Axios that Trump, quote, never agreed to a ceasefire, meaning during the phone call, Zelensky was like, but you agreed to a ceasefire. And as Trump points out, I never agreed to that. And he never agreed to it. Even when he was screaming on Twitter, he just said, Russia wants to enter the conflict. You should go and talk to them about the end of the conflict. The talks in Istanbul were supposed to be unconditional, which, as I kept pointing out on the channel, is very political language saying everything that happens on the battlefield continues while we have these conversations. Full stop. I don't know what Zelensky was thinking about. I don't even know what the European leaders was talking about. They also point out White House officials said for months that Russia had refused to present a document. And so the fact that Putin agreed to present a memo to explain what he wanted in regard to this whole peace deal was a success. Okay, that's a tiny success. Putin is going to tell you exactly what he told you before back in a year or so ago. And one last point. It says, Trump told the group that Russia and Ukraine should conduct bilateral direct relations without any help of a third party mediator because the parties best understand the details of the conflict. Effectively, look, you all need to go, meaning Europe needs to stay out of it. We need to stay out of it. And we need to let Ukraine and Russia have a conversation and decide what a peace deal looks like. All right. Now, that is fundamentally just what Putin wanted in the first place, considering this just picks up where they left off from the Istanbul agreements, correct?
Yes, but actually what's very interesting is the somewhat ambiguous position of the US as a neutral third-party mediator when the US, by and large, is the main instigator of this conflict.
Right.
So this kind of actually feels very surreal to me. And to be sure, Peskov himself, some while back, not that long ago, maybe a few weeks back, basically said that the conversation should be between Moscow and Kiev. But we all know that ultimately what's going to be decided, the impetus that's going to lead, if it's going to lead to something tangible, has to involve Washington. And so it is somewhat of a pantomime that's being put to us where they're trying to convince us that the conflict is between a proxy and a target of such proxy, when in fact we cannot seriously contemplate a situation where the main instigator, the driving force behind the proxy is but a mediator. But sometimes international politics takes on a whole new complexion, should I say. It's really strange. And so we're all supposed to kind of go along with this charade. And we all know it's a charade. It's almost like, I know that you're lying. You know that I know that I'm lying. But somehow everything is carrying on as if nobody knows. It's really strange. It's
It
really
is
strange.
bizarre. Yeah.
It's really bizarre. And your introduction to that question was actually perfectly well summarizing the situation, because we had the proxy was like, but wasn't this something about including a ceasefire? And you're right. At no point did Trump mention anything about I'm going to call for a ceasefire. The Europeans, Macron leading the pack, we can go back to that powder train sequence where the French president is being shown as busybody making phone calls. Yeah, Donald, I'm with the guys right now. Let me gather them and we'll get back to you. We've got a position, But what we're trying to basically get to here is that whatever comes out of those talks, what the stakes is really all about is to capture, and this was, I think, said by one of your guests, everyone is vying for Trump's perception of who's going to be on the hook if and when those stocks collapse. Because that will define whether or not Trump decides to basically cut his losses. And we have now, coming up the expiration of all the Biden's contracted weapon shipment. So even though the weapons keeps on coming into Kiev, they are only coming into Kiev on the basis of those contracts, those arrangements, and those bills and supplemental bills that were adopted by Congress under Biden. But at some point, those are about to run out. And so by the time this happens, and to the extent we have a parallel negotiation process, to the extent we all know the Europeans and Kiev do not want this to end, i.e. the war, the idea is to try to convince or to have Trump internalize the perception that if what he ran on during his presidential run
is frozen, there you are.
The question will be then, who's responsible for it? And to the extent the Russians are deemed in Trump's perception of the events as being intractable in their demands, then the idea, as far as the Europeans and Kiev are concerned, is that Trump will remain involved, will keep the United States involved, which is really the key. They need the US to remain involved, no matter what happens. This is the prime directive for Star Trek fans. They need to get the US involved to keep them involved. It's like this Godfather 3, line from Pacino when he says, I try to extricate myself out of this, and they pull me right back in. So this is what it's all about right now. And the idea also that Trump doesn't like to be somewhat, exposed as the guy who's ending up with eggs all over his face. And when that happens, usually he can show himself to be very, I'm gonna get even type of guy, So this is what's being actually engineered, at this international level, with all those meetings and this idea, coming from Brussels, I call them the big three. I mean, should I say the small threes, Starmer, Merz, and Macron, with so the three musketeers, and then D'Artagnan, Zelensky, and they're trying to get the Cardinal of Richelieu to remain the backer of when the Cardinal is actually the one who's trying to undermine Louis XIV, the man with the iron mask. It's really strange.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, because Trump is trying to act like a mediator and a party to the conflict, pretending as if he's not a mediator, like he's not a party to the conflict. He's still giving weapons, right? And then you have this kind of other weird situation where Europe is like, hey, it seems like we're holding the bag for this. Like they seem like completely shocked by the conversation. And what they don't seem to get is, what do you want him to do? Like, you've passed 25,000 sanctions on Russia. I think it's more than 25,000.
30.
It didn't work. Yeah, it's like 30,000 sanctions, right? It didn't
Well,
work.
Lindsey Graham is actually the because that's the thing about the Trump administration. We don't even know who's holding policy on the Ukraine file. We have two competing visions. We have on one end, we have Marco Rubio and Kellogg, who I don't understand why he's still into the equation. And I'm not even going to get into the conflict of interest that he has in as far as his own daughter being on the board of a company that profits from the war being waged on. So how could he be impartial? That makes no sense. But anyway, but Kellogg is still there. And the Kellogg plan is basically, we're stopping hostilities at the current line of contact, and we allow for Europeans to send troops as whatever they call themselves, coalition of the willing, reassurance.
Force. Yeah, reassurance force. I mean, it's nonsense.
Reassurance.
Right? Yeah,
makes no sense. And not to mention, the Russians have been clear about this. It's a red line. So that's a deal killer right there. But again, if we are trying to understand what's going on in those parts again, convincing Trump that the only reason why all his efforts, quote out of quotes, are not going to lead up to anything, it's because the Russians are showing themselves to be intractable. Then I guess it does make sense that Kellogg would promote a peace formula that, or at least a ceasefire of some kind, which has no chance of being adopted by the Russians. But then on the other hand, we have the Witkoff JD Vance approach, which basically is trying to more like put the onus, stress that if we have a problem here in trying to get this resolved, it's in Kiev. The guy doesn't want to play ball. But so far, it looks as if it's the Rubio, Kellogg, and Lindsey Graham, right behind them with his 500% sanction. I mean, it's crazy. If you do 500% sanction, as far as the tariffs are concerned, on anybody who is using Russian oil, you're going to shoot yourself even more so in the head. So at some point, you keep trying to shoot yourself in the head, you might just succeed in doing so. But this will involve sanctioning countries like India, and in the larger context of Trump's ambitions to develop, trade agreement with the Indians. Right now India is strategically important because they're trying to relocate a lot of their own interest out of China into India and trying to somewhat decouple India from the BRICS arrangement. So if you start doing this 500% tariff trade sanction on anybody who's remotely buying from the Russian and reselling it to the Europeans, you're basically, cutting the branch on which you're sitting. So Trump is not going to go for this. But it's just to give you an idea of how, very bizarre this situation is. We don't really know. The Russians, I mean, if you think about it objectively, they don't know on which foot to dance here. Which faction of the Trump administration are we really dealing with? But we have the Europeans trying to vie for Trump's favors, plus the guy in Kiev, and we have two factions within his own administrations who are each one pulling in opposite ways, trying to to get the Don to from what I understand, he's very influenceable. He says one thing, sometimes from an hour to the next, he says everything in its opposite. So and to add on top of this, he's someone who doesn't understand. I mean, geopolitics is not his cup of tea. That's just not the way he was trained or formed. He's a real estate type of guy, So
He does
making
understand one
deal.
thing though, and
Yeah,
I'll leave you with this.
yeah,
Trump was asked, because reporters in the United States are war hawks. They will go after a president in a heartbeat if the president seems to be trying to make peace. And Trump said this, and this is infinitely true, infinitely true. And God bless him for acknowledging reality. This is Trump.
Mr. President, on Russia, people actually love it. Mr. President, on Russia, are you worried about the reports on a military buildup along the borders towards Finland and Norway?
No, I don't worry about that at all. They're going to be very safe. Those are two countries that are going to be very safe.
And the second is, sir, Mr. President, on Russia,
People actually love it.
Mr. President, on Russia, are you worried about the reports on a military?
So that clip goes further, where Trump says something to the effect of, "Well, they wanted to join NATO, actions of consequences," or something to that effect. Like, no, they're good, they're okay. Don't worry about Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry. Trump didn't say that. He just said that he's not worried at all about them being there. I guess I'm saying actions have consequences. They decided that they wanted to join NATO. Okay, well, you've joined a military organization. You can't necessarily be shocked that Russia is going to take contingency plans that you've joined a military organization. I got the clip wrong. I misunderstood the context of it. But either way, you're absolutely right. Thank you for this analysis. It is bizarre.
Very bizarre.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. And so, but Arnaud, man, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. You be safe, okay?
Thank you very much.
Have a good one. All right. Shout out to Arnaud. Always appreciate his analysis. I was very curious. To me, Medvedev is the voice. That is the truth of what's going on. But to be honest, is that like what he's saying contradicts anything that Putin is saying or anything that Peskov is saying or Lavrov is saying? All of these guys are effectively saying the exact same thing. And even in the conversation with Donald Trump, it comes across that that's effectively what Putin told Trump. Trump wanted something out of it. He said, okay, we'll give you a memo. But keep in mind that memo is effectively going to be what Putin said that they needed for a ceasefire in the first place. And the fact that Donald Trump is saying, well, Ukraine and Russia should negotiate on their own. Again, that's the Russian position, right? We want to get back to Istanbul. You broke ties when we were doing Istanbul. Let's get back to it. Let's negotiate. And you get Medvedev saying, we can have peace or we can finish this on the battlefield. That is indeed the Russian position. I want to go to my next guest, though. He is here. He is the man of the hour, the guy I wanted to talk to considering what's taking place right now. We're joined with Koffi Kouakou. He is African Analyst, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Koffi, I apologize to you if there is any construction upstairs. It has been going on all morning. It is deeply aggravating to me, but fair enough. How you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing well. Can you see my face because it looks a bit dark there? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, you look fine with the
Okay.
beautiful map of Africa in the background.
Excellent.
No, you look great.
No,
No
I'm
issues
doing
at all.
fine. Sorry for the noise on your side.
Yeah,
I hope
so
there's no
far,
noise on my side as well.
it seems that we're in a lull in the storm. I don't know if Airbnb complained to the owner, basically bitched at the owner. I don't know. But you know what? Real quick, I sent 10 different audio files because I've been complaining all morning, and I've been taking audio of the noise, like of the banging and the like jackhammering, like right overhead, and just sending them audio files constantly. He would say something, I just
Yeah.
sent him another audio file, just all morning. I had like 20 different audio files for the last hour and a half, 2 hours. And finally, when it was like, yeah, I can't do anything about it, and I was like, okay, I'll go to Airbnb itself. We'll deal with it that way. Yeah, I'm sorry. Serenity now. It's just, man, it's been going on all month. It has not been this bad, which is what set me off this morning. But man, I'm glad you could join me. So the reason I asked you on, Ramaphosa, South African president, is in the United States. And from my understanding, this is after Donald Trump rescued the white South Africans who was under the oppression and under a death sentence by the South African government.
Genocidal.
Yeah, right. All of these people who never missed a meal a day in their life seem perfectly content coming into the U.S. while simultaneously him kicking out Afghans, not allowing people from like Sudan or some of these other countries that are literally in civil wars. But whatever, he had to rescue the white South Africans. And Ramaphosa is here apparently to do a reset in the relationship between the United States and South Africa. Now, part of the complaint that the U.S. has is obviously South Africa was the one that sent, that initiated the process of going to the ICC about arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, or for that matter, the ICJ. I believe it was the ICJ, saying they're committing genocide. And even given the documentation to demonstrate they're giving a genocide with, it was like 10 to 15 pages, was just comments by Israeli officials and the things that they were saying. Meaning, it is very difficult for somebody to prove that this is in their minds, this is their intent. But if you give 10 to 15 pages of just words and comments by the government, okay, well, you've demonstrated intent because you can just relate to what they've said. So, but Ramaphosa is here, he's like, okay, we need to reset this relationship with the US. This has gone off the rails. So this is him coming down the airplane. I don't, shaking hands, telling everybody hi. Now, what I don't see is, I guess they did roll out the red carpet for him, so God bless on that. My question is very straightforward. What does he plan on giving Donald Trump to reset this relationship? I mean, A, Donald Trump is racist. There's that. I mean, the white South African thing is, if that's not evidence of it, I don't know what is. Getting rid of the African American Museum and going after parts of that. Okay, that's random and weird. And so out of the blue of that, that's the thing you need to focus on. Not allowing people from, let's say, African nations to come over that are in war-torn countries, but rescuing white South Africans who are apparently under an oppressive government and being killed by the South African government. Okay, this stuff is weird, right? So in that ludicrous context, what is Ramaphosa going to give in order to reset this relationship?
Thanks for having me again, Jamal. Key to this is a very important meeting. I mean, South Africa is in the spotlight today. So in a couple of hours, which means basically 5:30 p.m. South Africa time, and I think 11:30 Washington, D.C. time, the meeting will take place. But there are plenty of things that have taken place already in the background. Softening up stuff, making sure things are all right. People are very worried about a great deal of concern about South Africans. I've already mentioned to you is they just don't want to see, a three-layer humiliation, and that is first Ramaphosa himself. In fact, I would even say four. Ramaphosa himself as a president representing the symbol of South Africa itself, Africa, and then potentially the global South, or even you can toss in the BRICS as well, because anything that happens there, South Africa being part of the BRICS, also will affect the image of it. They would think that South Africa is a weakling. But that being said, I think I'm just setting up the context so far. It's a high-stake, high-risk, high-stake meeting. And the advantage is on President Trump's side. It's on his home court, if I want to use the sports metaphor. He's playing home court. When we used to play basketball, we knew that we had advantage when we're playing on our home courts. So Trump's going to use it well, very well. But to directly answer your question, there's a famous saying in Latin saying, "Monstra me pecunia," which means show me the money, right? Monstra me pecunia. And the old days, the guys were they knew it, and that's what Trump is probably going to be focusing on, based on the question you asked me, that transactional instinct. Say, show me the money. There are many ways to show the money, making sure that, American companies have greater access to the mineral wealth of South Africa, buying property. I mean, this is a vast country. About 1,202,000 something square kilometers. That's a huge place. And not only that, South Africa has also got a special real estate at sea, about 2.3 million square kilometers at sea. I mean, this is a lot of place to play, and even some space around Antarctica. So I think the president is not disclosing really what he has, but many of us were speculating, looking at the fact that he's going to have to offer something to calm down the nerves. But you have a point. The place where it's going to be a bit sticky is on the ICJ. But before I come onto the ICJ, many around here think it's a meeting of oligarchs, right? So you have two oligarchs. One oligarch or billionaires. They're both billionaires. One who is a businessman turned politician, and the other one, President Ramaphosa, was a union leader turned businessman turned politicians. And he's been very smart in negotiation. He's known, he's got the skills and so forth. But there's no assurance that this one is going to work favorable to him. But people are crossing their fingers. They're hoping that there will be a big meeting that's going to come out as a sort of, to use the Chinese term, win-win. Ramaphosa will probably show something, and there will probably in the backdrop, something has already been cooking. But still, I think they still want to stick it to Ramaphosa, especially on the ICJ. Back to it. This is the stickling point. It will be very difficult for South Africa to withdraw that case at the ICJ. If South Africa does this, South Africa will be seen as a moral morally bankrupt country and weak, and that's going to play on its whole history and future for the rest of their lives. So this is going to be a sticking point, and there's nothing really there to negotiate because many countries have seen it. The genocide is happening. There's a lot of denials and people. I mean, it's unbelievable. After all the evidence, you've mentioned the 15 pages of evidence. There's more coming up every day.
Yeah.
If people don't see that as a very serious issue, there is something wrong with their mindsets, frankly. So whatever President Trump's gonna, if he spend the time on this, that we suspect that it's gonna turn out to be a very difficult one. So on my side, I see basically 3 scenario projections. You know, if we're talking about the sort of, if you're very worried and then you're focusing on the Zelensky, what many people call the Zelensky moment, but I also call it the Zelensky curse. There are 3 scenarios to look at. The first one is what I call the handshake trap, you know, where the president is photographed with, you know, nicely with Trump, President Ramaphosa, of course, and then President.
Ooh. Okay, he'll be back. Okay, he will be back. Give him a moment. We just have the handshake trap, effectively being photographed, shaking Donald Trump's hand, and it gets blasted to everywhere in South Africa that you are effectively shaking the hand of Donald Trump in this situation. I guess the question for me, like the reason why I asked is, what do you give in this situation? I mean, yeah, there may be a business element to it, but I suspect there's a racial element to it also. I mean, after all, Donald Trump brought all of these white South Africans in order into the country, in order to go with this idea of white genocide, right? So how do you have a conversation with Ramaphosa and not bring that up? Even if that's a stalking horse for another issue, even if it's a fig leaf for another issue, how do you bring the president of South Africa here? Have a conversation and sit down with the president of South Africa. And whatever opening statement or closing statement you give as a memo of this is what we discussed, this is what we talked about, this was the context of the conversation. To not have, we agreed that South Africa would not murder white South African farmers. That's what we agreed upon. We'll see if that's what ends up taking place. I have a hard time believing that you can get away with this conversation with this particular president and not have that come up at the very least once, where that becomes a memo. And, you know, what does Ramaphosa's head of the ANC, right? This is supposed to be a revolutionary or party of revolutionary fervor in order to right the wrongs of apartheid. Ideally, that's what it's supposed to be. So how do you, as constituent head of that party and of the president of that country, how do you walk away knowing that that might be in the memo saying that we also discussed the killing of white farmers and the horrible treatment of white South Africaners in the country of South Africa? Will your Black delegation accept that? Will the Blacks of South Africa even accept that? How are they going to take a statement like that? And for that matter, knowing full well that Donald Trump is the one that rescued white South Africaners. How do you deal with that? That may be what Koffi was talking about. Like when you shake his hand, you're shaking the hand of a man that accused South Africa of murdering whites and murdering white farmers and stealing their property. And this goes to the whole Elon Musk thing too, right? Elon Musk is here. Elon Musk is supposed to be meeting with Ramaphosa also. What does that look like back home? What does that look like back home? Yeah, that is a tough one. That is a tough nut to crack if you're Ramaphosa and you are coming here because A, Trump is passing sanctions. B, he's putting more pressure on South Africa in the way that he's effectively operating. And in passing more sanctions and putting more pressure on South Africa, you have a business community in South Africa that says, look, you need to go fix this. Ramaphosa comes to try to fix it. Okay, what does that mean to fix it? Is that cutting tariffs? Is that trying to eliminate tariffs and trying to allow more business into South Africa? What does it mean? And what do you give as Ramaphosa? Koffi, dude, I'm doing the show. Obviously, I can't pick up. And what do you give in that situation in order to make that work? Those are tough questions, especially if you're the president of South Africa and the president and head of the ANC proper. Those are difficult and tough questions. All right. Koffi may not be able to make it back on. That might have been why he was making the phone call. So I want to go to another issue, which was going to be my monologue before my guest comes on. I have consistently made this point, and I've been an honest actor with it, meaning I haven't taken a position that I am God's all-knowing, and having God's all-knowing can decisively come down on one side or the other. So I've given you two versions. It could be this, or it could be this. The white hat version, what you see is what you get, or the black hat version, that this stuff is contrived, that there's a media manipulation that's taking place in order to create space to allow something else. I am coming down more so on that part, especially on the Israel, Iran, the US spot. Let's be very clear. Oh, he's back. He's back. Koffi, welcome back. I couldn't pick up
Yes,
Koffi. I was in the
can you
middle
hear
of the
me?
show. You're
Yeah,
fine.
no, sorry, it was on your side. Apparently, the network on your side was down. I don't know why.
No, mine is up. I was with the audience the entire time.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So, listen, where was I? I think I was talking about the three scenarios.
Yeah, three scenarios.
And let me go back probably to the three scenarios very quickly so that you can go with the other question. I was saying that the first scenario, in general, the concern about this meeting is the upside risks that we can see. And then so there's this idea that there was a Zelensky moment, what I also call the Zelensky curse. And I put it in three scenario projections. The first one, as I said, was what's called the handshake trap, if you remember, where, President Ramaphosa will take a picture with Trump, and then suddenly Trump will shake his hand and then announce very brutally some kind of sanction against South Africa, and that will be really a big spectacle, as I was saying. And then the second scenario is the what I call the tough talk fallout, in the sense that President Ramaphosa would challenge directly President Trump, if not openly, and then the meeting will end abruptly. But I don't think that might be taking place. And I think President Ramaphosa is smart enough. If he does that, it's going to have a huge implication for markets, for the rand falling apart, losing different trade agreements like the AGOA with the United States. And there could be a much longer diplomatic freeze for the next 3 to 4 years. That's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario, which I call the strategic reset that you mentioned already, is the idea that, behind closed doors, the two, or at least the two camps, have managed to cut a deal, and allows the transactional stuff to take place. And then it'll quietly de-escalate the tension and mitigate the risks, among, between these two. And I think this is probably what everybody's hoping for, that best case scenario. However, it's not a given President Trump's approach to things. People are still concerned. They want to see what's going to happen in a couple of hours. But we are all hoping something good will happen to it. But people are worried that they don't want South Africa to give away the whole barns, which means South Africa needs to save its sovereignty one way or another.
There's one more that I want to add to that. That Donald Trump, who brought over the white South Africaners, in the readout or in any kind of conversation that they're having in the open, brings up, hey, I need you guys to stop killing white South Africaners also. I need you to stop killing these white farmers. Meaning the fact that he brought those farmers over, it makes it very hard for him to ignore it. I mean, let's say that the white South Africaners was a stalking horse for something else, that he doesn't fully believe the stuff about a genocide of whites in South Africa. And who knows? Donald Trump is just, I really don't believe he knows anything about the world. I think people just tell him stuff and he just runs with it. So if Elon Musk says, hey man, they're killing white South Africans, he says, oh my God, they're killing white South Africans. And that's what he goes and tells the media. And so he brings these people over. How does he not bring that up? It's such a big thing, right? It's such a big spectacle. You have all of these chubby, overweight people who apparently are being genocided coming into the airport. And how do you not say something about it to Ramaphosa while he's here? And do you say something to him? You two are sitting there in the Oval Office, and Trump is like, hey, by the way, you need to stop murdering the farmers. That's the fourth.
Yeah.
You could do it.
Yeah.
He would do it.
Yeah.
He would do it.
I think you've got a point. But, you know, in my really crazy mind here, I'm like sitting and I'm thinking, you know, President Trump, after all the thing, after his tour in West Asia, you know, it looks like something has come to him where he started looking into becoming a little bit more realistic. And I hope his people have briefed him enough to understand that Africa is at the center of tomorrow's world. You know, critical minerals, South Africa, for example, has 15 of the 17th most critical minerals, the rare earth elements. This is very important. So if he cuts with South Africa, not only American companies will lose out, there will be a very difficult way for him to convince the rest of Africa. He may be able to deal with a few African countries by coercion. But I think if he gets the right information, he's now probably rethinking. We know, for example, that strangely enough, he hasn't even set up his Africa team fully. You know, but you got to give him room though. After about 4 months or so, and he doesn't think Africa is a priority. But very soon, as many of us are knowing, he's slowly getting the information that, my goodness, Africa is an important place to deal with. And South Africa might be your leverage to be able to move into that continent. Yeah. And so giving that kind of strategic information and knowledge, you might be able to tone down the rhetoric and not attempt to sort of dismiss or humiliate President Ramaphosa in public as, you know, he did. Well, I think the part that he did with Zelensky, you know, many of us thought it was okay.
I thought it was fine, personally.
Exactly. Yeah. But with Ramaphosa, I mean, he doesn't have the cards, right? I'm sure he's not going to say I have the card, but in this one, he doesn't have the cards. So it's going to be difficult to convince people that there's some really, you know, well-fed Afrikaners who are now being genocided here. And I mean, there are crimes here. Frankly, we can't avoid this. I mean, many of us are not happy, you know, dealing with crime and employment, inequality. South Africa is the most equal country in the world on the Gini coefficient, you know, in terms of inequality. So these are very serious challenges. And, you know, Black and White are trying their best to come out, but people want the president to do a little bit more. So if he's successful in Washington, bring that success home and convert it into domestic challenges and deal with them. But we're hopeful that President Trump will just won't go off on the limb. And I think I have a pretty sense that it might not happen that way. It probably could turn out to be a very lame meeting.
I hope it is. I hope he's respectful. I hope none of that stuff comes up. I hope it's... See, Zelensky pissed him off in that meeting. That's why he went off the rails.
That's right.
When he's talking to Europeans, he just does it. He just holds them in contempt. Like when he's saying Justin Trudeau came here and cried. Okay, he holds them in a bit of contempt because from his point of view, they were backing Joe Biden. So it's a little bit different. So he may deal with Ramaphosa differently, but I'm not sure. I mean, Trump is a...
No, I would agree with you, but remember, that one thing we did talk about is Ramaphosa's team. He's managed to really build a strong team. I mean, almost all of them are billionaires and they talk golf. You know, these are the things that really pushed up President Trump's button. Probably they're probably going to offer him some kind of casino or hotel somewhere in the Western Cape. I don't know yet. But he's got one of the wealthiest, white guys, Rupert, on board with him. He's also got some of the old golfers that are sitting with him, white South Africans, very well known, who playing, and he's also there with his brother-in-law, who's also a billionaire, Patrice Motsepe, who's also the president of Confederation of African Football Association. So they've built that team with the hope that something will happen. And I think among wealthy and elite people, they like to hear that they're meeting with, people who have some substance in terms of material wealth, that they're not sort of coming in dressed in sandals or pretending that, they're poor people coming to beg for money to the United States. Right. I think if President Ramaphosa goes the begging bowl, he will have a hard time getting out of there. I wouldn't say alive, but escaping from it.
So is the issue the sanctions, not the sanctions, the tariffs? Basically, that he wants the tariffs removed. He wants something to assist with some kind of business development in South Africa. Like he's looking, meaning, why is he doing this reset? Is it because of business interests in South Africa? That's the issue.
It's largely transactional business. Look, I mean, as I told you again, the team is brought with him or not. There's no poor person in that team. Yeah, it doesn't mean they're not, they don't care about poor people, but this is a meeting of billionaires. And with the hope that if they can cut a deal, it'll also benefit poor people. And I think the 30% is quite high. And if they can get a reduction on it, that would be a good one. But I think to a large degree, the US, President Trump might have a point. South Africa has been benefiting from this relationship more than the US has, you see. So perhaps there will be some more overtures from South Africa to say, look, we're gonna by resetting, it's to look at the not just diplomatic relationships, but trade relationships. And then making sure that American companies have room to maneuver in South Africa, not just being bogged down also with another one. There's what's called Black economic empowerment laws that really oblige any company, any person who wants to do business in South Africa to shed off 30% of that company to the locals.
Yes, but again, South Africa.
Look, I'm talking about this because this is one of the gripes of Trump's advisor, Musk. And as you know, Musk has been in the news lately with the Grok. I'm sure you've read about the Grok issue. But more important, it seems like South Africa is trying to soften up the part to give a deal to Starlink. And Starlink, this morning I was in an interview with the local media on Starlink in Africa. They're really progressing very fast. More than 20 countries are now dealing with them. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's not going to be easy because there's security and sovereignty issues involved in this. If the data is somewhere, data sovereignty becomes more important these days. Somewhere the CIA can enter it easily and controlling. People are worried about that. However, African countries themselves haven't done a good job in making provision of these kind of satellite opportunities to make sure that strategically their people are connected in telecommunication. That's a huge gap, and that's a huge weakness. In fact, it's not only Elon Musk Starlink that's going to take advantage of that. We're hearing that there's a Chinese company that also want to compete against Starlink and then put the satellite up for free.
But see, that's the rub, though. South Africa was an apartheid state. You have, as you pointed out, the inequality is off the charts. And so the laws are based upon the history of South Africa. They're trying to balance the scales. And so Elon Musk, white, South African, it's like, oh, I don't like that. Okay, yeah, but dude, you've been advantaged by a country that was an apartheid state for decades. And now that they're trying to balance the scales, it's like, oh, we don't like that. We think that's unfair. By the way, we deal with the same thing here in the United States. You had blacks who effectively helped build this country as slaves and worked for hundreds of years. And then at the end of it, you get nothing for it. You're called a free slave. And then even after you try to go through Reconstruction, there's a clawback and a response to the Reconstruction. You have redlining. You have all of these laws. Even this kind of implicit bias built into the society, going all the way up to like the 80s, if not beyond. Not to mention soft racism, dealing with doctors and those type of things. And so it's like, hey, Blacks have like $14,000 of wealth. Whites have 114,000. You don't think that's weird? Yeah, but we don't want to do anything about that. It's unfair to try to fix that. And I'm saying the same thing is true in South Africa, where
Yes.
you pass laws with the ANC and you get a white Afrikaner who is saying, I don't like those laws. And he just so happens to have the ear of the president of the United States, who is, I would wager to you, is going to put pressure on Ramaphosa to try to change those laws. And this could be the
Yes.
last question. Will
Yes.
would Ramaphosa even do that? Could he even do that, considering
No,
he's part of the
to
ANC?
answer your question, the laws will be difficult. He can't do it alone because that's got to go through Parliament, and people in Parliament, including the opposition leaders and the people in the African National Congress, are against changing the law for one person. Remember, the law must apply to everybody.
Right.
And largely, if that legal understanding is upright and put up there, it will be difficult, but they probably will find other ways to source it up for Elon Musk to do business in South Africa. And they probably need his business. In fact, most NC people have been too late to deal with Elon Musk. They should have done it a long time ago to look into possible, especially on energy issues and so forth. But I think now that they're under pressure, which is an amazing thing for South Africa, one thing that I've noticed is that every time there's some kind of danger or outside pressure in the country, everybody comes together. And I remember that, the 2010 World Cup football, the Rugby Cup a couple of years ago, and many other things, the ICJ and so forth. So this, to a certain degree, is forcing South Africans to look at themselves and come together as a group, white, blacks, or mixed race and so forth. And I think it's going to push something about South Africa to do the best, not just internationally with the ICJ case or with the trade between the United States, but also look at the self domestically. And as I said, there's so many domestic challenges to deal with. And we don't need anybody from outside to tell us how to do that.
That's right.
And we're hoping that the lessons will be learned and that the president come out of this stronger. But if he doesn't, South Africans will take the world, they'll do their best. And I think we can't cry on spilt milk. If the US doesn't want to do business with South Africa, it will be the US's loss, because there are a lot of others, as Victor Gao, former translator of Deng Xiaoping, said, the world is becoming so big, the market developing almost everywhere, that the potential for finding other opportunities, even especially on the African continent that South Africa has neglected, in its own backyard. The whole continent, all these countries, 54 of them, having trade businesses going up to only 15%, Jamal. This is a shame. It should be 85 or 90, even 100% in partnership to move about on the continent. So, the challenges are there. However, it is hoped that this meeting brings the best out of South Africa.
Koffi Kouakou, he is African Analyst, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Koffi, thank you for this, man. Really appreciate it. You be safe, okay?
Thanks, Jamal. See you again.
Absolutely. Cheers. All right. That fantastic breakdown. Koffi is always fantastic with his breakdowns. Going from one to the other, we are joined with Esteban Carrillo. Esteban Carrillo, he's an Ecuadorian-based journalist currently working for the Cradle, a great outlet. I binge those articles because you guys are fantastic in your writing. He was previously with Telesur English. Esteban, welcome to the show, man. You doing okay today?
I'm doing great. Good to see you, Jamarlt, and everyone else who's joining us this morning.
Oh, man, it's always good to have you. I have to bring up Rubio. So Rubio was given testimony. And, we saw the picture of Donald Trump shaking the hand of a head chopper, Al Jilani, that he helps. Oh, that was his nom de guerre. What is Al-Shar or
Shout out today. Shout out.
Yeah. He is like his different name today. Most people know him as Al Jilani. But he is now, quote unquote, president, jihadist president of Syria, as I like to call him.
Appointed himself president.
Yeah, he did. It just a hostile, brutal, vicious takeover paid for by Turkey, the US, Israel, supported by Israel. I mean, for God's sake, the U.S. put billions of dollars into trying to overthrow Assad. Trump, we're stealing the oil. We're stealing the oil. Trump defending Idlib from pressure that was coming from Russia, Iran, and from Syria, allowing Idlib to basically explode with all of these terrorists and jihadists come running out into Syria and able to take over the country. All right. So Rubio, giving testimony recently, said this, which is amazing after
each other.
after everything that's taken place. And I want to get your take on this as to what this means. I'll say it that way.
If you look at the history of the region, when Syria is unstable, the region becomes unstable. And this has certainly been true after the Arab Spring led to the Assad rebellion against Assad, and that really destabilized the entire region. And then it turned Syria, frankly, into a playground for jihadist groups, including ISIS and others that used it to operate and to destabilize their partners. So you have this change in December. And my view, which I've discussed with many of you individually, is the bad news is that the transitional authority figures, they didn't pass their background check with the FBI. Okay, they've got a tough history and one that we understand. But on the flip side of it is, if we engage them, it may work out, it may not work out. If we did not engage them, it was guaranteed to not work out. In fact, it is our assessment that, frankly, the transitional authority, given the challenges they're facing, are maybe weeks, not many months, away from potential collapse and a full-scale civil war of epic proportions. Basically,
Do you put these jihadists in power? You acknowledge, even in this, right? These guys didn't pass their background checks. Okay,
That's insane. That's such an insane quote.
Yeah, that's a hell of a way to put it, that these guys are jihadists and terrorists, right?
Yes.
That the leader of the country was one of the head of ISIS.
Yeah.
And okay, and from that, I'm sorry, I've been arguing with that separate issue. And now you give an assessment that we think that this government, where Trump shook the hand of the guy, is weeks away from a complete collapse and a total civil war of epic proportions.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Well, I think it's very interesting. First of all, last week, Donald Trump says that Shara has a very strong past, right? He says a strong past, a fighter. And now, like, not even 7 days later, you have Marco Rubio saying these guys didn't even pass an FBI check because there were a bunch of jihadis, Islamist extremists, as you said it yourself, a bunch of head choppers. And I just sent you something. I don't know how easy it is to put up, but it's that the former ambassador to Syria, the U.S. ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, essentially, patting himself on the back during some symposium, during some forum, in which he talks about how he helped, rebrand Shara from head chopper Julani, the deputy commander of ISIS, to.
By the way, I already have that clip.
Today.
And I had the clip waiting for you because I knew you were coming on, and I had the clip waiting for you. But please continue. I'm sorry.
No, it's such an amazing thing to see. And, in terms of just like how kind of, I guess, the form, the facade of things have just completely collapsed, right? And in terms of just U.S. officials coming out and saying the quiet part out loud, not really caring anymore. It's what Rubio is saying, he's not wrong. What he says about that Syria, if Syria becomes unstable, then the entire region becomes unstable. That's true. That's why this war was initiated in the first place. And that's, he talks about the ISIS, is gonna like revive, or that the country was taken over by ISIS. Who led ISIS into Syria, right? Who opened the doors? Who opened the floodgates? Who funded these groups? Which media outlet? It was Al Jazeera, by the way. Started creating these narrative that Sunnis were being persecuted in Syria, just so that these extremists would call for a caliphate and start flooding via Turkey. It was all NATO. It was all NATO and the Gulf. So now they just kind of go back and be like, oh my God, we cannot allow this to happen. Well, for the first time, it already happened. You already let it happen. So this is going to be the second time that this happens. And the fact about the civil war, I think it's like a two-sided thing. I think, first of all, it's a Rubio trying to give some sort of excuse, I would say, to justify lifting the sanctions, right? Remember, Donald Trump announces an end to the sanctions, and then the day after, the U.S. Treasury is saying we don't really have a framework to lift sanctions because some of them are like executive decree, which can be repealed, and some of them are congressional. They were passed by Congress, so you need to get Congress to lift them. So Rubio, is testifying in front of the Senate, and he's essentially saying, there's going to be a civil war if you don't lift sanctions, to kind of, I guess, like grease the wheels a bit. But on the other hand, he's not speaking, completely dishonestly in this sense, because just over the past couple of days, for example, in the north of Syria, clashes reignited between the Kurds and the government forces, the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, that is part of this government, former ISIS, former Al-Qaeda. About a month after the United States brokered a ceasefire, right? And the Kurds agreed to join the army. Now, all of a sudden, the clashes erupt again. So it kind of goes to show you, and what's been happening with the Druze in the south, what's been happening with the Alawites and the ethnic cleansing that, Sergei Lavrov spoke about this yesterday, condemning the Syrian authorities for doing this. You can see that this is actually a brittle administration, quote unquote. This is not a government self-appointed that really has a tight grip on Syria. Right? What they have is the support of the West. And what they have is a bunch of jihadis who are, ready to go door to door killing a bunch of people. But they still don't, the EU announced lifting the sanctions this week. So that's probably going to give them some help. And remember that the Gulf nations paid Syria's debt to the World Bank, which was like $50 million, opening the door for the IMF, for the World Bank, for all of these, organizations to come in and start flooding money into Syria, into Shara's pockets, into his government pockets, but giving the impression, right, that Syria is a safe place to invest. That's another thing that Rubio said, that we need to lift the sanctions because investors do not want to be sanctioned. And again, it goes to show you, why were these sanctions implemented in the first place, right? If all of a sudden today they are so hurtful to Syria, weren't they hurtful to Syria 7-8 years ago when they first were enacted?
It's wild to me that I was talking to this about Arnaud, where we're in a different context, though. Like where in Ukraine, Trump is trying to pretend like, hey, I'm just the mediator. I'm just a third-party mediator.
I'm just here to see.
While still being part of the conflict. And for this, it's like, yeah, man, ISIS just went bananas. And, we had to beat back ISIS. And, now these guys have taken over. Missing the fact that, Obama himself had spent billions of dollars to overthrow the Syrian government.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to overthrow the Syrian government, by the way, goes all the way back to like George Bush Jr. So you're talking about like 20, 30 years of them working to undermine that government and to try to take down that government, with Obama putting in billions and billions of dollars to do so.
Yeah.
Where these ISIS groups were being funded by the US in many respects. And so it's like, okay, man, are you really sitting here making this case to us that these guys just went bananas out of the blue? And these other guys who've taken over, using a euphemism, haven't passed an FBI background check with strong histories. Yeah, because they were fucking ISIS. Like Jelani himself was leader of ISIS, or one of the leaders of ISIS himself, right? And so the notion that Donald Trump shakes the man's hand, protected him in Idlib, as you point out, this Brit who was talking about it, effectively saying, look, I, greased the wheels between him and the United States. And even showing pictures, if you notice in the background, of what he looked like back then.
He gives a whole explanation, right? He says, like, look at him now, look at him then. It's really transparent, You cannot fault these people for being, at this point at very least, for being dishonest. They're being very honest about what they did and what their role was.
Astonishing. I'm just saying, the way that the U.S. deals with this is we're acting like we're this impartial actor in this.
Yeah.
And we're just
trying to help, You're trying to help.
This meta-analysis. And by the way, the entire point of getting rid of the sanctions is because, as you pointed out, they understood that those sanctions were crushing. That part of the reason that the Syrian government collapsed in the first place was those sanctions and stealing the oil.
Exactly. The Caesar Act was such a heavy, such a harsh package of sanctions. You didn't just sanction Syria, you sanctioned any country that even dared to work with Syria, and you single out the financial institutions, you single out reconstruction, you single out purchasing medicine. Remember what happened, Jamarl, in the earthquake of 2023, 2 years ago, when the United States wouldn't give Syria waivers to get humanitarian aid in after this huge earthquake hits, the south of Turkey and the north of Syria, and the UN, is essentially begging the United States to give a waiver, to give a humanitarian waiver, but they didn't, right? Because but imagine if it was Sharia, you would have if he had been president, then all of a sudden you would have all the nations in the world joining hands, let's help Syria. But it didn't happen, and I think that's more than enough to show you just really the level of dishonesty that is at work here. And I think right now Sharia in particular has every reason to believe that he can survive, I guess. Although, remember, I don't know if you saw that there was apparently some talk in the US government about assassinating him.
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing, like these news are coming out, because then you also have Israel. You can never forget about Israel, right, in the south, that if Syria has been trying to be torn apart and destabilized for as long, is because that's what Israel has been desires, right? This is the desires of the Israeli state.
Right there. That's the other part. So if you're looking at like Syrian analysis, what is the name? It's not Kevlar. He has a damn good show, right?
Yeah.
And what they pointed out like a year ago was that there's no way they're going to allow a head chopper to be head of Syria. There's no way. And the only reason you would do that and allow something like that is because you know it's going to fall apart, allowing Israel to take more territory in Syria, saying, hey, we didn't have a choice. Look at what they're doing to the Druze. We have to get more involved, right?
Yeah.
Hey, we have to create a buffer against this destabilization that's taking place. I mean, let's be honest, right? If you have a stable Syria, can you really create this greater Israel?
No,
Not really.
not at all.
No,
not at all.
it would never
Stands
happen,
in the
right?
way. Yeah.
If you have a destabilized Syria, like I keep making this argument, war, you can justifiably take territory in war. It's just part of war. You can't do that in stable eras. Like if we're stable countries, I can't just say, hey, by the way, I'm going to take X amount of kilometers of your territory. People are like, what? That's outrageous. I'm not going to allow that.
There's an act of war. Yeah.
It's an act of war. But if you're already destabilized and your country is already in turmoil, and the country can say, yeah, we feel unsafe. So, we need to move in another few kilometers.
And when the propaganda is so strong, that people don't really understand what has happened in Syria, right? Like a regular person, not somebody that follows the news. All they know about Syria is that it's just like an unstable country. And then you hear Rubio come out and give these statements, and I guess in your perspective they make sense, because in a way they do, but at the same time it's just missing so much context, and it's rewriting history, in front of our eyes. It's just like rewriting everything. But again, this is what we're seeing, for example, with the genocide in Gaza as well, which all of a sudden you have left and right, countries coming out to condemn it 19 months into it.
I don't think that's straightforward, though. I think the reason that they're coming, I honest to God think that the reason they're coming out condemning that is because an attack on Iran is imminent. And they want to distance themselves, saying, hey, look, man, for the last 2 days, we've been condemning Israel. As the thing, after they strike Iran, is like, we don't have our hands on this at all, because we were condemning Israel for the last 2 days, despite the genocide that was taking place for the last year and a half. I think it's that. I could be wrong. I think that's why all of the propaganda about Trump and Israel is coming out. Trump tells Netanyahu to allow them to eat, stop the starvation campaign. Okay, dude, I don't buy the premise of any of this. I'm sorry, give me your take on that. Do you think I'm being too cynical, too much of a hard ass?
No, I think it's theater. I think it's completely theater, because it would be very interesting to see exactly what is the tipping point for the US, for the EU, because Israel is not slowing down, right? Like their invasion of Gaza, they haven't allowed any aid in. They have allowed, I think, less than 10 trucks, or just a handful, and a bunch of them not even carrying humanitarian aid. They're just carrying shrouds. Yeah. So there's the situation. You know what? The UN, a UN official yesterday said that 14,000 babies are at risk of dying within 48 hours. Today, within 24 hours. And nothing really seems to tip the scale, right? So I think you might be onto something with your theory about Iran, because if Israel moves against Iran, maybe that would be a tipping point, right? Because it really seems like the United States does not want a war right now. right?
I
This
don't
is
buy
one.
that premise. I'm sorry. I don't buy that premise, Esteban.
You don't buy that they don't want war at the moment.
I do not. I don't buy that the U.S. wants war with Iran. It's a secondary thing. Whether you I don't believe for a moment that Israel is a rogue actor. I don't buy their premise. I think they're a proxy, every bit as much as Ukraine is a proxy. And in the same way that Donald Trump is trying to pretend as if, that's Joe Biden's war. I'm just trying to stop the war
I think,
while simultaneously give weapons and money. I think the
yeah,
same thing is true for Israel. If Donald Trump wanted to stop, okay, I'm no longer giving you UN support. I'm no
I
longer giving you billions of dollars.
they could have done this so long ago.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
the answers are right there. Like when they talk about they don't know what to do. I mean, Jesus, you just lifted the sanctions on Syria that crushed the economy. You can't sanction Israel. You can't stop some weapon shipments. You can't, anything. But
Precisely my point.
I think what's happening at the White House in particular is very interesting because what we're seeing is kind of this head-on clash between your classic neocons, war hawks, against the MAGA folk, right? Against the MAGA people
Yeah.
who are genuine in their desire to not expand, U.S. interventionism abroad, or at the very least, as you're saying, use proxies, right?
Yeah.
But not send our troops and not like a waste or industrial base, just pumping money for these forever wars. I think we are seeing that at the moment, and Donald Trump is caught in between. And the thing you always need to remember about Donald Trump, is that he's not a man that is acting out of his good conscience. He's acting out of whether he can get a good deal out of any of this, right? And that be it a diplomatic agreement with Iran, or be it just simply, the money that the Gulf is offering. And I think this is a big point of maybe this will be the tipping point, right? Because I think is in particular the Gulf who don't want a war with Iran, because all of a sudden, like I think I said this a few times in your podcast, that the Gulf, they don't mind funding a war that is a bit, not near their borders. But if all of a sudden the war is with Iran and is right there in the Persian Gulf, then nobody's making money. Then nobody's, what's going to happen with the Vision 2030 plan? What's going to happen with the UAE's, own development plans and and everything else that they're trying to do with their own countries? This is also why, despite all the pressure during the Yemeni campaign, neither the Saudis nor the Emiratis agreed to reignite the war against Yemen, because they themselves don't want to get sunk into this. So I think that's really where
the Saudis were. I could show you the reporting where the Saudis were attacking the border of Yemen.
Yes, but they didn't expand the war. They just were really keeping it at the border, and in a way, if you can even call it that, being careful not to really, draw the ire of Ansar Allah, because I think at this point we know that Ansar Allah is not really the bear you want to be poking. So that's what I feel. Like Donald Trump all of a sudden got a pledges of upwards of $2 trillion, between Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. You're talking about a massive sum that was pledged, right, for the US. So now, for that money to start flowing into the coffers of Washington, there needs to be stability. There needs to be some sort of stability. And right now, Israel is the only country that's standing in the way of that. They are the only country that's standing in the way of that. So I think, what's going to happen, I really want to know. And at this point, I'm just fascinated by the possibility that at some point the United States is actually going to take a decision to be like, and I feel like it's not going to be something like, oh, we'll stop all weapon shipments. They'll probably just be like, we'll stop the 2,000-pound shipments, or we are doing, I don't know, we are putting a letter of condemnation at the UN, like just anything.
I've seen this before under Joe Biden. Fool me once, that's my fault.
Yeah.
but I wasn't even fooled under Joe Biden, because it seems so ludicrous that we give money. Donald Trump was at the ICJ, not Trump, but somebody from the US, like a week ago, arguing that Israel has a right to starve 2 million people.
Yeah.
And now the media is screaming to me that Donald Trump is telling Israel that he must feed the babies. Okay, get out of here. I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. I don't believe that Israel is a rogue actor. I legit believe that they're a proxy.
No, they're not.
I don't believe they are. And so if they decide to go after Iran and say, well, we're going after the nuclear things, do we honestly believe that they're doing that without the U.S. approval?
with not, I think that they're doing it without the complete disapproval. You know what I mean? Like I feel like maybe there's a bit of a finger wagging, but not exactly. You know, like an actual red line. Because at the end of the day, also Israel master at crossing red lines. You know, you tell them this is a red line, they would jump right over it. And what I wanted to say was about what we're hearing about the starving of the children and well, just the famine that is spreading in Gaza. That is just like, all of a sudden, all of these media outlets and all of these governments, I think it's actually more tied to the fact that in 3 days, this mechanism that is going to be run by the U.S. is about to be implemented, right? They're talking that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is going to start work in 24th of May. Right. And this is, something that all humanitarian agencies have said. This is not humanitarian aid. This is a dangerous, dangerous thing that the United States wants to implement in the south of Gaza, because it's going to forcibly displace Palestinians by essentially asking them to give up their land in exchange for, a measly portion of food. And this is to support Israel, right? The United States is implementing this so that Israel can take over the rest of Gaza. The United States is not here talking about let's protect Palestinians, let's feed Palestinians. No, they want to forcibly displace. Remember, Donald Trump, has been very clear in wanting to take control of Gaza himself, to build his little, Riviera or a freedom zone, I think was the last name he gave it. But then at the same time, you have this summit in the UN in about 3 weeks that is going to be spearheaded by France and Saudi Arabia, in which they are describing it as a no turning point for the two-state solution. And, France, and you saw the statements from France, from Canada, and the UK this week, in which they threaten concrete actions against Israel. Ask them what, who knows? But they talk about the summit at the UN, and they talk about the two-state solution. Now, in practical terms, the two-state solution is a smokescreen. It's just like a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be an actual thing. What I see happening is recognition of a Palestinian state and a bunch of agreements that talk about a future something or other, just enough to get Israel to stop the carnage. And then they're going to let them do exactly what they want to do, which is take over Gaza and take over the West Bank. I don't think there's any stopping that. But they will try to find a way to frame it differently, right? To create a different framework for it, so that all of a sudden, you have CNN and the BBC not talking about famine, but talking about reconstruction, or talking about, humanitarian assistance, or talking about, how can these people even live in this toxic wasteland? Which, yes, how can they live in this toxic wasteland that is Gaza, right? So all of a sudden, their displacement is not displacement; it's a humanitarian.
That's the way Trump is talking about it now. That's what I mean. This is a scheme. This is not like I
cannot hear you, Jamarl. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's what I mean. This is a scheme. I don't buy this premise that all of a sudden you still can't hear me. Can you guys hear me? Hello. Mic is active. My sound is
I lost you.
Testing 1 2 3. Still can't hear me. Hello. Can the audience hear me? Guys, can you hear me? Yeah, the audience can hear me. This is on your side. This is on yours. This is not on me. This is on yours. That's fine. This is on yours. Hold on. Yeah, they can hear us both. Esteban, how about now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Esteban can't hear me. I'm going to close. I'm going to close. Okay. I'm going to close. Esteban was fantastic. We were coming to the end anyway. I told you I'm very skeptical about this. I want to bring in my next guest, though. I am joined with the man himself, Michael Maloof. Michael Maloof, there we are. Michael Maloof is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense. Michael, how you doing, my man? Can you hear me okay?
Great. I'm good. Thank you.
Perfectly fine. Good. Thank you for joining me. I'm glad you joined me on this. I have a tendency on this show to get other people's opinions, especially before I crystallize my own my own take.
I don't know about that.
Well, I do get other people's opinions. You'd be surprised. I ask people the same question over and over again because I want to get their takes, and sometimes they have very different, divergent takes on some of these things. Trump's Putin phone call has just taken place. Now, I think I said before the phone call took place that nothing was going to happen in that phone call, that there was no bridging the gap between where Ukraine is and where Russia is, and that a lot of the stuff is influence management, trying to get Trump to believe that they want something that they don't necessarily want, meaning I don't believe for a moment that Ukraine wants peace. Russia may want a deal, but it's never going to be on U.S. terms, considering the fact that they are winning the conflict and they have effectively won the war. But you have to deal with Trump, because if he passes more sanctions or if he decides to get more involved, it will be easier for Russia if Trump just walks away. One of the interesting things in Axios is Axios points out that Europe was shocked completely at Donald Trump's phone call when he contacted them after the fact. And one of the parts is, Trump points out, he says, Trump told the group that Russia and Ukraine should conduct bilateral direct negotiations without any third-party mediators because the parties best understand the details of the conflict. Effectively, you all need to stay out. We need to stay out, and we need to let them work this out. Okay, well, that's effectively just Istanbul again, in what Russia wanted in the first place. Medvedev came out and said, look, this is your last chance. You can either surrender, or you can come to peace terms, or you can capitulate. There is no two other options. There is no other door in this, in what's going to happen right now. Give me a take on this. I mean, do you think that ultimately Ukraine will be dragged to the negotiation table, or do you think that no, Zelensky has no room to maneuver? Whatever it is in his mind, he is forced into the position that he is in, either by the Europeans or, for that matter, by the Banderites that are in his government. If he signs a document, he will be strung up on a lamppost in Kiev. Like, give me a take on this so far. Just I'm providing context, but give me a take on these talks and everything else around it.
Well, the Europeans still want war. There's no question about it.
Yeah,
they just agreed to take some more of the frozen Russian assets to send off to Ukraine for war. Zelensky, on the other hand, is caught between the proverbial rock and hard place. He's under pressure from Trump to at least negotiate something. But at the same time, as you point out, he's got a gun to his head from his own people, and he's caught between the rock and hard place. Putin can wait it out. I think what shocked the Europeans is that Trump did not institute sanctions against Russia. He has no intention of doing that anyway. I knew that before he went into the discussion with Putin, simply because, as I pointed out earlier, that Trump wants a far greater geostrategic arrangement with Russia to deal with other issues apart from Ukraine, but he needs Russia's cooperation. Plus, he respects power, and he's now regards. And I said this on Sputnik in a published article the other day, that he wants he recognizes Putin and Russia generally as a strategic equal, and that's really critical for the Russians, and they respect that, and that's really going to be important. So, notwithstanding whatever is the outcome with Ukraine, he's going to proceed. The Europeans cannot do anything because they don't have the infrastructure on their own independently. They always caveat, we're going to give you all this aid and all this military assistance with U.S. backing. Well, that is not going to be forthcoming. And I think Trump, and particularly JD, has made that very clear. So we're in a state of flux here, and waiting for the next shoe to drop. I'm waiting for the agreement for them to get together. Trump agreed to with Putin that the next thing is a memorandum of understanding on what the terms should be for so-called ceasefire. Even Putin came back and said ceasefire, recognizing that he said never a ceasefire because that'll give Ukraine a chance to rearm. Well, that isn't going to happen either because the Europeans don't have the capability. So, as you point out, Putin is really in the driver's seat on this, and he's going to continue pushing this along. He knows he just saw, as a result of that phone call, that Trump is not going to bring the hammer down on him. Now, what could happen is that he'll come to his arrangement with Putin, but the Europeans may not. And if they do anything counter to whatever is negotiated between Zelensky and Putin, they're on their own. Yeah. I think Zelensky, because of the agreement he now has with the United States on mineral rights, is going to be forced to at least sit down and work out something. But you have to have the teams to come up with the terms. You don't in a negotiation, you don't start off with your principles. You get your teams to come together and come to terms, and then the principles come together and anoint it. Yeah. And that's really the proper approach in any diplomatic negotiation. And that's what's occurring now. Putin basically put the whole thing back on track, and Trump readily agreed to that without sanctions. So we're watching the implementation of a process. It's going to take longer. And I would add that just yesterday or this morning, Zelensky fired off a bunch of drones toward Moscow, and they all got shot down. So and Putin immediately reported that to Trump.
Yeah, he apparently reported also that he was putting those world leaders in danger at the victory parade. And to be clear,
but he was persuaded not to.
Yeah. So what Putin said was a ceasefire if appropriate agreement is reached.
Right.
All of it is qualified.
Everything is qualified. Yes, and he has good reason to be that way because he saw what happened right after Minsk II, where there was basically a ceasefire. But at that time, Zelensky kept bombarding Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Mm-hmm. And what most Americans do not realize is that since 2014, Kyiv has been bombarding and shelling the eastern part of their own country for 8 years. For 8 years at that time, before the SMO, special military operation, began in February of 2022. People don't know that generally because it's not reported by the Western press. But as we've seen on Sputnik, on RT, we would see the daily feeds out of the videos of the bombardments that were going on. And at some points, Zelensky would go and visit the front in these autonomous, declared autonomous regions. Mm-hmm. And yet the Western press would not pick that up. So the West, and particularly Americans, just thought, one day Putin woke up one morning and said, I think I'll go and invade Ukraine. No, it didn't work. That wasn't the case. There's a history, and people who don't know their history are going to be condemned to relive it.
Agreed. 1,000% agree with you. It's amazing to me.
That's depressing.
It is. Well, it's amazing the way the media is cut. Well, the media is cut here a very specific way. I was listening, I was PBS. Oh God, this was a few months ago. And he said something to the effect of, Russia invaded. Putin is a war for no reason, effectively. And that was their news bit. When they were describing the very end of kind of like a summary of how this started. And it's are you serious? That's your summary of how this began?
Yeah.
I mean, it's outrageous.
Yeah, it's all propaganda. And, I don't want to recite recent history, but up until December of 2021, Putin was sending diplomatic warnings to the Biden White House and to the State Department, and they were all
Absolutely.
poo-pooed. They were being the Americans were talking down to the Russians, unconcerned about the red lines that Putin was describing, and I know he made numerous démarches or diplomatic presentations to that effect, that this was really affecting our security. The fact that you still want Ukraine to join NATO, even though they profess to remain non-aligned, either from joining Western or Eastern defense alliances. And actually, it's in their proclamation to become an independent country back in 1991. So there was violent, and they were being, and what was happening was that they were being, Zelensky was being encouraged to do this from Boris Johnson of the UK at the time when he was prime minister, and Victoria Nuland, and of course the Biden administration of Blinken. So the history is there. The Americans just don't know it. And so there was warning, because Putin once said, look, we're Russia. We are where we are. We can't go anywhere. Yet you have NATO encroaching through expansion on us. And, we gave up the Warsaw Pact in 1991. So why are you doing this? And it all stems from the neocon ideology that was coming out of Washington and embraced by the allies, the NATO allies, so long as Washington was paying the bill. And now we're seeing all of that change under Trump. Trump wants NATO to go up to 5% of their own GNP, or we're not either not going to protect you, or you can get out. And I think that once Trump comes to some arrangement with Putin on the bilateral terms, you'll notice that the Europeans have been cut out. I think that if the Europeans want to do something on their own, they're going to get squashed, and the United States is not going to get involved. And I think, when you look back, and we see a pattern of behavior over at least the last 2 centuries, that we're always fighting European wars.
Yes.
The Europeans are fighting among themselves, and then now, from World War I and II, the United States intervened to help bail them out. But on the other hand, we can't continue doing that.
But see, some people will make the argument, and I think I would even make this argument, so I'm not going to just say some people, that what Donald Trump is doing is not disengaging. He's not going with this idea of a multipolar world. He's going with a new hegemonic model where there's a diversification of resources, where he wants to diversify resources to the Pacific while allowing Europe to diversify resources to Europe. I mean, basically, look, we need you to build up militaries, kind of like what the Romans did, right? Where the Romans are like, all right, we've expanded so far, and we don't have the manpower in order to do what we want to do. So let's bring in these quote unquote barbarians, and let's add these barbarians to our ranks, to expand our ranks. The barbarians in this case will be Europe. We need Europe now to take over a large share of the responsibility of dealing with that continent for us, meaning they're still our vassals. And even Donald Trump saying, hey, we need you to increase your amount to 5%. But that's not the U.S. necessarily disengaging. That's the U.S. effectively militarily disengaging while still maintaining control over the way Europe effectively functions and operates.
Well, we're not, fighting for the United States. Whatever little ancient feuds that the Europeans continue to harbor, it's not a threat to the United States. That's because of the new mindset that Trump has introduced about America first. Is it in our national interest? Is it a threat to the United States? That's why I don't regard Iran, for example, as a threat to the United States. It isn't.
Right.
It might be a threat to the bases we put out there. Well, get them out. We don't need them over there. Let the Middle Eastern countries deal with their own damn problems. Let them stew in their own juices. But what Trump is introducing here is a brushed off new spheres of influence type of approach. It's sort of a pseudo multipolar approach, but with a recognition of power bases of elites with Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
These, he recognizes and respects power. That's where he wants to deal with. You see him doing this also with Erdogan, and he's going to be doing it with Kim Jong-un. These are, again, they're looked upon as autocrats, but that's what you need to deal with power politics on the international scale when you're dealing with these people. They respect power, and he recognizes that. That's why you have the peace through strength. But just because you have the strength doesn't mean you go out and flaunt it and invade every place and spread your hegemony everywhere and use cutouts to undermine other governments and have regime change everywhere. Those days, hopefully, will be over.
Speaking of that, and I'm glad you mentioned that, new intelligence suggests Israel is preparing a possible strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, U.S. officials say. Now, I will take the position that Israel is not a rogue actor, that Israel is a proxy of the United States, one of those cutouts that you just mentioned, and that they would never do that without the consent of the United States. And I would even go further. All of this chum that has been put into the press of Trump and Israel has a rift, or Trump tells Israel, hey, it's kind of bad that you're starving 2 million people, after a week before going to the ICJ arguing that Israel has a right to starve 2 million people. Like, even all of the European vassals coming out saying, hey, we don't like the fact that Israel is starving all of these people, when beforehand they had no issue with Israel starving all of these people. All of this stuff is chum added to the water to create distance between the U.S., or for that matter, these European countries, and Israel, knowing what they're about to do with Iran. So they could say, our hands aren't on it. For the last hour and a half, we complained that we didn't like the fact that Israel was starving 2 million people. Even Donald Trump's thing, where Israel, this stuff is a scheme. Donald Trump has already stated the quiet part out loud. Netanyahu has already said the quiet part out loud, that they're trying to put these people into concentration camps with this notion of kicking them out of the country in some sort of way. And Donald Trump has effectively agreed using this humanitarian rationale, despite the fact that we're paying 80% of them to commit that genocide. So give me your take on this. Rogue actor, or they're doing this without expressed knowledge?
Well, I think Netanyahu is turning into a rogue actor in this. He's having to yield to his internal pressures through Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, just in order to keep his government in power. And Smotrich just the other day talked about how you need to starve all the Palestinians, kick them all out. He's basically resorting back to the old messianic concept of taking back or recreating a so-called greater Israel that they envisioned from the biblical times. That and Trump, as you know, was just in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has a different outlook on things. And I think if Trump wants Saudi Arabia, UAE to continue paying in, and also to be his golden parachute once he leaves office, because he's not going to run again. Obviously, he cannot. He's going to yield to their needs and their outlook. And then for the first time, you're actually hearing Trump talk about the Palestinians. Before, they were just people in the way. Let's feed them, And he also has family members who are putting pressure on him that you cannot continue to have these kids starving. And Netanyahu just doesn't care. Now, what Netanyahu may attempt to do is limited bombing of nuclear sites. If he does that, as Trump is trying to come to an arrangement with the Iranians, I think it's going to piss him off even more, because he says we almost have a deal. The issue there is over the question of percentage of uranium.
No. That's not the issue. It's
It's one of
enrichment.
the issues.
It's enrichment in and of itself. I can show you the clips of Witkoff.
Yeah.
I can show you the clips of Trump, where Witkoff has expanded what they wanted. Initially, it was how much are we going to enrich, and then it became we need the Libyan model going forward.
They are signatories to the NPT. They are entitled under proper international supervision to enrich and to have a legitimate nuclear development program. They are allowed to do that.
Right.
And that, I think this is once again where Trump will need Putin to help come in, because Russia has designs on helping to build those reactors for the future in Iran, and you need enrichment. And if even if they, I know somebody said the red line is 1%, no more than 1%. Well, it was agreed in JCPOA to 3%. So, come on. And even the Iranians are saying it's totally unrealistic now. We've moved on. And I think if they can allow up to 20%, and the Iranians have suggested that they are prepared to cut back, but they are entitled to a legitimate nuclear development program. And if we have an opportunity here to open up, not only to allow the Russians to oversee and help police that, because they would build a reactor, but the United States could also assist the Iranians in that nuclear development program, as they do with the Saudi nuclear development program, which they are really keen on doing because they want to, diversify their economies for the future. 2030 is part of it. This is all part of the 2030 project with Saudi Arabia. So there's a lot of things swirling around here in this mix that can come together in a way that we sort of walk a nice tight line, be of assistance, economic assistance that allows us influence as a consequence, and it lessens the prospect of confrontation and war as a result.
But and I know both.
That's my formula.
This has nothing to do with nukes. This has nothing to do with nuclear power.
No, it doesn't. And the Iranians don't really have the means. Okay, if they could, they have the technical. They are a threshold country. They have the infrastructure to build a bomb. Can they deliver it? Can they miniaturize? Now, if it push turns to shove, I think this is where the North Koreans could certainly assist, and even the Pakistanis. They could lend Iran a few nukes if they really need them to put them on the missiles. They have that capability. There is a long history of cooperation between, notwithstanding their differences on Islam, between Pakistan and Iran. But they have had a history of cooperation, particularly in the military field, and certainly the North Koreans do as well. In fact, it was the North Koreans that helped develop the Iranian missile program in the first place.
Really? I did not know that.
Beginning with Scud Seas. Yeah, beginning with Scud Seas. How did North Korea become a net exporter of missile technologies in the 90s? They got it originally from the Egyptians and reverse engineered.
Go ahead. This history is fascinating to me. Like just the inner workings of how this stuff gets.
This is how it evolved.
Yeah.
People think, well, where did the North Koreans get the know-how for missiles? Well, they got it from the Egyptians originally, and they developed the Scud Sea as a consequence. They also developed the means, and this is where my people came involved. We actually figured out where the North Koreans were getting very specialized steel to house the nitric acid as fuel, not nitric oxide fuel, for liquid fuel, to be on standby for over a year without having to fill up and show and give a lot of indications and warning. They could shoot them off very, very quickly. And we figured it out where that steel was coming from. We knew they didn't have an indigenous capability. We knew they were not getting it from the Chinese. They were getting it from Japan.
Japanese steel. Japanese steel.
It was Mitsubishi Steel.
Yeah.
It had titanium incorporated, infused into the steel, but it was not under any export controls, and that's why they could readily get it. There's a strong relationship between the Japanese and the North Koreans, called the Chosen Soren. They're like into their 5th or 6th generation, going way back to World War II, and before. So and you have North Korean businesses in Japan that, for all intents and purposes, are regarded as Japanese, but they're really North Korean fronts.
Korean. Go ahead. Oh, this is like Kill Bill, Japanese steel. Like it's the special brand of.
It was specialized steel. In fact, I have a little plaque. It took my people 6 months to figure it out. We had the people down at the missile group down at Huntsville actually do the tests on the steel. We were able to abscond with a Scud C and actually do tests on the steel, and that's where we found how they actually were holding that nitric oxide in their missiles ready to launch. And we saw it. We also saw it in Iraq during the Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and
looking at the mineral content that's in the product in order to figure out what's in it.
Yeah.
And there it is, titanium.
That's what my people did. It took them 6 months to figure it out, and it has never really been broadly broadcast. But our group did this, and we actually were given at that time a classified award by the Secretary of Defense.
Are you serious? Wait a minute, a classified award? Oh, so nobody publicized the fact that they gave you an award for figuring. Oh, that's interesting.
Oh yeah, because we were able to figure out how they could be on ready alert and do it so quickly. We couldn't figure it out. We couldn't figure out where they were getting the steel, and I had my group, my people took 6 months for us to break it all down.
Wait, so why did they they classified it because they didn't want any other country to know where the steel was coming from either,
or that we even knew about it.
Secrecy among secrecy, just piled on each other. Oh my, that's fascinating. You have worked in a fascinating job. Like, just to put it mildly.
I've had my version of experiences, yeah.
Yeah. Michael, man, thank you for that.
I wouldn't trade them for anything.
They sound fascinating, and I would imagine a lot of that stuff is classified where you can't even talk about, but still fascinating nonetheless. I'm always fascinated when I'm talking to people who are behind the veil and the things that they've done behind that veil. But
it's based on that basic Scud C technology on which the Iranians then went solid fuel and developed their missile tech program, again with North Korean help. So that line of assistance is long-standing, and if the Iranian, to get back to the original point, the Iranians really wanted to go nuclear, they could, but they're not. So we got, and I know people say, even though the supreme leader has launched 2 fatwas against going nuclear weapons, well, he has, and he's the supreme leader. That is the last word in that culture, and they respect it.
I know
we don't, because we say, oh yeah, they'll just go ahead and do it anyway. They don't.
Oh, yeah, because we're cynical about stuff like that.
And our own intelligence community says that the last indicator that they had of any nuclear weapons development program was back in 2003, which was stopped, notwithstanding what Netanyahu was yelling about.
Correct. Now bake that into the cake for a moment, because I want you to see it through my eyes. All of that's given for me. And if all of that's given for me, then the dishonesty of the way that we're talking about it, that doesn't give you pause about motive. Like in the way that we were looking at Iraq, and we said, Iraq is weapons of mass destruction of Iraq. And we knew
when it comes to governments, I have a saying, I don't care which side is which, especially our side, having been in the system, you never can mistrust them enough.
That's my point. Like, if they're lying for a reason.
Yes, they have motives.
Yes.
There are ulterior motives. There are ulterior motives. It
And what would
isn't
be the
clear.
ulterior motive?
Nothing is ever clear cut.
Right. And what would be the ulterior motive to lie about them having or trying to create a nuke? If not
In order to conquer, for regime change, ultimately.
Exactly. So that's the lens through which I see it. They did the same thing with Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. They knew they were lying. And now, lo and behold, their weapons of mass
destruction. And they did it to Libya. Even though we got Libya to pull back, that gave us an entree to invade. And that's why North Korea said, we're not going to be another Libya. Even the Russians objected to us going into Libya back when we did that. Forget the year.
Looking at Iran, and we're using a similar argument for Iran, that doesn't give you a sense that they're trying to do the same thing to Iran to justify attacks on Iran or regime change in Iran?
They are. It's history repeating itself, just in a different country, different time.
But you just don't believe that Trump wants it. That you have people around him who want it, but Trump himself wants something else. I see. Okay. That makes more sense. Okay. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, you still have the neocons there that want to pulverize the place and have regime change. But I've seen what the Iranian opposition looks like, and they suck. They can't get their own little act together. They're all they want to form another elite group. Well, they're just going to become their own autocrats once again. So I see down the line what would be a replacement. Let's say conceivably they could replace the mullahs, which and the supreme leader, which is not. You got to distinguish in Iran between Islam and the supreme leader versus the government.
Right.
The Iranian people like their supreme leader and be run by the clergy. They don't like the government, the way it's being run and being kept down. So there's a distinction, and the supreme leader ultimately could replace the president overnight if he wanted to.
Yeah.
And he has.
Michael Maloof, my man. Mike, thank you for this, man. I always appreciate you joining me. I really do. Michael Maloof, he is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, and a regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense. Michael, man, you have a fantastic day. Thank you for this.
You too, Jamal. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. You have a good one. All right. My guest is here. The man himself, KJ No. Always a fan favorite. KJ No is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He is a contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once it's by Amazon. He is now available at iacenter.org. He is also part of China Report on Breakthrough News. Definitely check him out. KJ, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining me. You doing okay today?
I'm doing well. Pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you. Okay, I'm sorry. Just give me 1 second. Okay. There's been a lot of stuff going on this morning. So I was checking, I had to do a quick check. Interesting things that are taking place. Donald Trump has, I don't know what to call it. The idea that the US is, in fact, let me show the article, because the article is so outrageous that it defies belief, and yet it exists. Nonetheless, it flies. The U.S. declares global use of Huawei chips violation of export laws. Basically, he's trying to criminalize the use of Huawei's AI chips across the world, going through borders and everything else. Like, I don't care about your sovereignty. I don't care about your borders. This is against the law. Which is pretty astonishing that one man in a country that represents 4% of the world can say that and say it with a straight face. And yet he's saying it with a straight face. China has to be gassed by this. And they've also put out their threats of, if you limit our stuff, we will retaliate. So we're now back at another standoff between the US and China on issues of trade.
Yeah, Jamal, this is a pattern with the United States. You know, the United States will make nice about one thing, and then immediately it will do something else to undermine it. So it's a pattern of Jekyll and Hyde good cop, bad cop. And you saw this throughout the Biden administration. The moment that they would de-escalate tensions, right after, immediately after meeting, they would initiate some really, really aggressive sanctions on China. And it's a strategy. It's Jekyll and Hyde, good cop, bad cop, beatings and flowers, beatings and flowers. They just kind of pendulate back and forth between them. And what it speaks to, Jamal, ultimately, is that the US is at war with China. We're not right at the stage of kinetic war, but we are at the stage of subkinetic war, or if you will, this is the strategy of what you do in counterinsurgency. In fact, this Jekyll and Hyde tactic is what you do under counterinsurgency. You give your opponent, soccer balls during the day, play soccer with them during the day, give them, vaccines, and then at night you break into their houses and, kidnap their children and their wives and, and scare them. So this is a deliberate strategy that's going on. And it's something that the Biden administration mapped out, starting with the Afghan war. It goes back much earlier, but it's been a continuous strategy. And so you can see that even as the US accelerated the tariff wars, then it dialed those down. And at the same time, the next day, it started these attacks on Huawei's Ascend chips. So this is the larger pattern. Why did they go after Huawei? Well, it has to do with the fact that the US sees war in a very broad sense. The war with China is not simply escalating towards kinetic war, but there's everything else you do before that. And that involves lawfare, information warfare, cyber warfare, and of course, tech warfare and economic warfare. These are all components of what the US refers to as a kind of multi-dimensional hybrid war. So this is one dimension of that hybrid war. And if you recall, during the Biden administration, the US passed legislation to destroy Huawei. Why is, what's the thing about Huawei? Well, Huawei is, among other things, it is a worker-owned company. It's one of the best companies on the planet, but it is a worker-owned company. And it spends about $20 billion a year on research. So it is always at the cutting edge of research. I think they have something like, I want to say tens of thousands, possibly up to 70,000 people doing research. So it is a research powerhouse as well as a tech powerhouse. Of course, it makes probably the best phones in the world. But the United States, in order to sanction or to destroy Huawei, because Huawei represents China's growing technological edge, the US wants to cut China out from any technological development. They essentially want to freeze China's development in place. And one of the plans that the Biden administration came up with was that we're going to put Huawei into a 4-point chokehold. That is to say, they cannot buy US chips, they cannot buy the machines that are used to make chips, they cannot get the design software that you use to design the chips. Anybody who works with Huawei, who has any relationship to the United States, will be sanctioned. They're not going to be able to use an American OS, that is Android. They're not even going to be able to use the enterprise software that they use for running their company, sending emails and coordinating things. Even that was banned. Everything was banned. And the US referred to this as a 4-point chokehold designed to kill. The idea was to kill Huawei and to kill China's technological development. What was the result of that? Huawei just made its own chips. It developed its own technology. It built its own operating system. It built its own enterprise software. And now it's making its own chips. These are the Ascend chips, the B, C, and D. And the US is saying that no country, no company can use these chips, buy them, sell them, use them for AI, or use any US chips to run training on Chinese AI systems. So they're coming out full frontal, saying that anything Chinese is completely banned. And as you point out, the Chinese are not happy with this. They will take their own countermeasures. This is the problem with the people running the Biden and the Trump administration. First, they don't realize that you cannot prevent the growth of technology. You block them from developing technology, you block them from access to chips, they'll simply develop their own. Second thing is they don't understand that the Chinese have counter moves. And I assure you, those counter moves will come fast and rapidly. And I think we can expect to see the entire tariff regime unravel pretty rapidly unless the US steps back from this. And then, the other reason is US policy and the US government in general is run by lawyers. Okay, most of the people in US legislature and in the US government are lawyers or they have a legal background, and there are a few businessmen. The Chinese government is run by mathematicians and scientists. Okay? Now, the chip war is a science war. It's a math war. So if you have the lawyers competing against the scientists, who do you think is going to win?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a science war, science. But
I mean, it's obvious, right, Jamarlt? If you get into a boxing ring with a boxer, who's going to win?
I'm going to get knocked out.
You're going to get knocked out.
Yeah, I'm going to get knocked
Probably. But if the boxer challenges you to a chess match, who's going to win?
Oh, I'm going to win that.
You're going to win that one.
I'm going to win that, hands down.
It's the same thing. The lawyers, the US lawyers have challenged the Chinese engineers to an engineering match. Okay, who do you think is going to win this one? The Chinese engineers are going to win this one. And they don't understand that because they think that by telling themselves stories, the law is an interesting body of knowledge. It's a highly technical, highly specialized, area. It's a field, very, very specialized. But inside law, there's something they call the theory of the case. Okay, theory of the case just means a story. It's the story you tell yourself, and you think that your story is going to be better than the other person's story. And if your theory of the case prevails, that is to say, if your story is better than your counterparty's story, then you win. And this is what lawyers are trained to do. They're trained to be better storytellers than the other party. That doesn't work in engineering. It's not about storytelling. It is about engineering. It's about logic. It's about science. It's about math. And the Chinese are functioning from a very, very, very different standpoint. And the US doesn't understand this. And so I think that this is their contest to lose.
Let's be honest, though. It has nothing really to do with the story. It has more to do with this kind of... After the Second World War, the US came up with this idea of full spectrum dominance. And that's not, I know a lot of people think that's just military. It's not just military. It's also this idea of economic. Like, for all of the talk about free enterprise and free market, okay, that sounds nice. The reality of it is, I don't want to have to compete with you if you just don't exist. And if I can put my product out, meaning if I can blow up, if we both have donut shops and I can blow up your donut shop, my donut shop is the only one that people are going to buy donuts from. They may not even like my donuts, but they will buy my donuts if they want a donut. If I have another competitor, okay, now I have to work harder. I have to get better. I have to do, more in order to entice customers to come to my side of it. Now, ideally, in an ideological sense, that is what the free market is supposed to do, right? You have multiple ideas. This person makes their product better. They make their product cheaper. They succeed at the marketplace in a competitive sense. And the one who is better succeeds. You may have others who kind of go down the line, but all things being equal, the one that is better and can do it better succeeds. That's ideology. Reality is different, right? And in reality, we don't want to have to compete in this way. We don't want to have to deal with another competitor of us on the technological global stage, especially if you can make your chip cheaper, if you can make your computer cheaper, or hell, let's say the airlines, if you can make your airlines cheaper, if you make your cars cheaper, if you make them just as sophisticated for a cheaper price, okay, your cars may be better than our cars. So no, we're not going to allow your cars into the US because we don't want our car market to compete and have to even compete. And I say the same thing is true for the chips. It has nothing to do with the US thinking, oh, they're stealing our technology. It's not that. That's what they say. The reality is we do not want to have to compete with China's chip industry and Huawei as a technological giant and Goliath. If we can eliminate it through some kind of legal means, we will do so. Give me a take on that.
You're absolutely right. So the US wants hegemony. It wants full spectrum dominance. In the 1990s, they put it down on paper explicitly. This is the Wolfowitz doctrine.
Yep.
And of course, they want dominance and hegemony in the world of tech as well, because it's related to the larger project of global domination. And so there's a kind of digital Wolfowitz doctrine, if you will, where the US has declared that it is going to control AI. And it's going to, when we say control and when we say it wants to win, it wants to win not by competing fairly in the marketplace, as you point out, which has benefits because, drives prices down and improves products, etc. Simply wants monopoly. This is why Peter Thiel said competition is for idiots. He went out and said that, right? Peter Thiel, the backer of JD Vance and the founder of PayPal. He's one of the, the tech bro warhawk class right now, which is driving the Trump administration. Peter Thiel said, competition is for idiots. What you want are monopolies, because that's how you get your exorbitant profits. That's how you get to gouge everybody. That's how you get to control and dominate everybody. So it's all about domination and control. And the specific dimension of AI and chips in this, first thing to understand is that, the semiconductor chip was originally invented for war, right? It was built because they were trying to miniaturize the control circuits, the steering circuits, in a guided bomb inside the nose cone. And that nose cone was a very cramped space. So they came up with a way to compress the transistor circuits so that they could fit inside the nose cone of a bomb. That is the genesis of the computer chip. And then it was, generalized to other things. And then you think again about AI. The US sees its war with China as significantly involving a war over the control of AI. Who controls AI? They believe controls the world. Now let's go back once again to the genesis of AI. Where did AI start off from? Well, a large part of anything technological in the US that's developed is about preparing for war. But there were two dimensions of AI. One was, coding, programming, what's called in the larger sense, the physical symbol systems hypothesis, which is that you code your computer so that it can act autonomously and replicate elements of human intelligence. Mm-hmm. Why did they want that? They wanted machines to be able to launch nuclear weapons after the planet was destroyed. This was yes, exactly. This was AI for battle management. Essentially, you want a system that continues to fight after all human life has been destroyed. This was the coding dimension of AI, which didn't pan out or had its problems. And then there was the other dimension, which we refer to right now as neural networks. And this was a kind of a hardware-infused structure that was going to replicate the nature of the human neuron that you put together circuits that mimic the human neuron, or what they thought was the model of the human neuron. And you do this and you train it to do something which approximates learning. It's really just math, but it approximates something that looks a bit like human learning. And from this, the idea is to develop a kind of intelligence. The first neural network was something called the perceptron. What was the perceptron designed for? It was designed for, excuse me, it was designed for target recognition, acquisition, and essentially it was a targeting mechanism.
Yeah.
How can you target things faster and more effectively? And that's what it's all about. The genesis of AI, both compute and programming, was really about war. And the US, and that tradition has continued to this moment. And so in the current day, AI has become significantly powerful with the large language models and now the large movement or behavior models, which are very, very powerful. And the US sees this as a way of accelerating its dominance in war. And currently, the wars that we are seeing right now, whether you realize it or not, are AI-powered wars. For example, everything that's going on in the Ukraine, all that targeting and all that logistics, all that, coordination, kill chain coordination, that's all AI. The genocide that is happening in Palestine right now is done by Israeli use of American AI, Lavender, Where's Daddy, all of that. What they do is they look at, for example, somebody's digital breadcrumbs, the digital breadcrumbs that they leave on the internet. And based on that, Lavender decides whether they are, quote unquote, a target or not. It's a machine that does that. And then Where's Daddy, decides how and when to target them. All of this is AI enabled, and it's done by US corporations like Palantir and other AI corporations. And so right now, war itself is the application of AI as it was originally intended right from its genesis. And so currently there's an AI war going on. Against China, it's currently in a pre-kinetic dimension, but the US wants this global domination, and it wants this domination of the digital, technological sphere, the digital Wolfowitz doctrine. And that is why it is going hard after Huawei, and it wants to prevent its chips from becoming adapted or successful or becoming a norm. It won't work, but that's what's going on.
Just outrageous. One of the other interesting ones, we have a little bit of time. Star Wars, that's back. So Donald Trump has come up with this thing of Golden Dome. And as the reporters ask him, hey, has anybody really asked for that? And of course, the answer is nobody asked for that, right? There are even treaties about putting weapons in space, which is what Golden Dome would require, which is why China is pointing out that's outrageous. And by the way, I'm surprised Russia hasn't said anything about this. If they weren't in negotiations, I would imagine they would be hopping up and down about this too. The notion that you're putting weapons in space is supposed to be outlawed by various treaties that other countries have signed onto. And the US bitched and moaned when he came out that Russia had this weapon that it could shoot into space if it needed to take out US satellites. Because if there was a war between the US and Russia, one of the first things that they would want to do is to eliminate the advantage that the US has from the standpoint of satellites. And so you fire a nuke in space, it creates an EMP blast. The EMP blast destroys effectively all the electronics of the satellites, which blinds any targeting data that you may get that when you become familiar and accustomed to those satellites being in operation. And so they complain bitterly in this country about that. Oh my God, I can't believe Russia is doing that. And now Donald Trump is effectively saying, hey, we're going to put weapons in space. That's what we're going to do. China's right to complain. And by the way, when they do this, China would do the exact same thing.
Absolutely.
And Russia will too.
Yeah, so we're heading into space wars, which, as you point out, by the Paros Treaty and other treaties actually are designed to prevent space from being weaponized.
Yep.
Why? It's very simple. When armies confront each other, they look for the higher ground. Okay, whoever has the higher ground wins. And in war, there is nothing higher than space, right? So the US wants to, once again, it's this full spectrum dominance, but it wants to dominate the higher ground of space. That's why the US actually already has a space force, in addition to, the Navy, the Air Force, and, the Army, etc. The US has a space force, and the US wants to dominate space. And the Chinese, and I'm sure the Russians will join in soon, they don't want this. They don't want this constant escalation of war, because that makes things more and more dangerous. And what you're looking at with something like the Golden Dome is you have to understand that you cannot separate defense from offense, right? When you increase your defensive capacities, you're also increasing your offensive capacities. That's why, for example, body armor, the purchase and the wearing of body armor is much, much more restricted than the purchase and the carrying of arms, for example. Most states have very, very strong restrictions on body armor, except for law enforcement. But the restrictions on guns themselves are actually much more lax than the legislation around body armor, because they know that if you have people with body armor walking around, then that just adds another layer to the risk and the danger. And what the US is proposing is that it's going to essentially say, we're going to put body armor over our entire country at the same time that we continue to accelerate our nuclear weapons development. Okay. That is a catastrophe. That is a recipe for planetary suicide. And certainly the other countries are going to do one of two things. They're going to weaponize. If this doesn't de-escalate, they have to weaponize space as well. And so then we're going to run into, all kinds of, risks, nuclear weapons in space, for example. And the other piece, I'll just, kind of throw this out, is that this is going to be done by, once again, the Silicon Valley dirtbag class. We're talking about Palantir and SpaceX, etc. It's going to be done by private contractors. So it is going to be pigs at the trough, feeding off, the possibility of war. But will it be effective? And can they outmatch or outpace China's capacity to develop technology? I'm not so sure about that. As I said, China is a country which is led by scientists and engineers. They understand science and engineering. US is led, including some, tech companies, they're led by lawyers. That is not a recipe for success, but it is a recipe for tremendously dangerous escalation.
Yeah. KJ, you're so right. The issues with lawyers is, my mom always said she never wanted me to be a lawyer because they're dishonest. Basically, they lie for a living.
There's a line from Shakespeare, which I won't repeat here, but he seems to think that, there is a
solution. To kill all the lawyers, if I'm not mistaken.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's what I was talking to Maloof about. Like, if you notice, one of the first things that happened when Trump was supposedly wanting to come with this kind of rapprochement with Russia was they started getting more honest about the conflict. Well, NATO was always a red line. Ukraine was always a red line. NATO expansion was the reason for it. Meaning the first thing that they did was change the way that Joe Biden had been talking about it, where he had been lying for 3 years, to being more honest about how the conflict started, why the conflict started, how Ukraine was always a red line, all of this stuff that they never said for the 3 years. And the reason is because reality, when you deal with it honestly, you can easily, or at the very least more often, come to some level of, okay, I understand where you're coming from. You understand where I'm coming from. Let's make a deal in order to kind of hash this out. But if I make up these kind of farcical stories and use that as my rationale, like, so if Trump says, or Iran's trying to produce a nuclear weapon, okay, well, your own intelligence assessment doesn't pan that out. But you're saying it as a stalking horse for, Israel is a threat to you. You can effectively destroy Israel if you need to, if they attack you. So you're a threat to Israel. We don't want to say that because that's not really America first. What we will say is you may get a nuke. We don't want you to get a nuke. And so now we can go to war with you if you get a nuke that you're not trying to get. Like, it's the lie that propagates the war. And so it's like, yeah, lawyers, they lie for a living, right? And when you have a government of lawyers who think that the only thing that matters is a story, that reality can be manipulated and managed to anything that you want, you are far more likely to wind up in some kind of conflict or war. And that is the way that the US has operated, just as a norm. And it is deeply aggravating. And now he is talking about spending, and mind you, this is after having Doge go through the richest man on the planet, firing poor people, destroying Medicaid, destroying Social Security, destroying public services, and saving, what, $150 billion, with Republicans putting $20 trillion on the debt, and with him spending hundreds of billions of dollars on this nonsense system that nobody asked for and that is completely unnecessary. It's just outrageous.
You're absolutely right. And, this goes back very deep and long, but I just want to highlight, remember Karl Rove's statement. He said that, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, we'll go on to create, we're history's actors. We create our own reality. This is what they're doing. They think that they can simply invent the world by telling themselves stories and do whatever they want to. And the problem with that is that comes up against the cold, hard, boundaries of physical reality, of objective reality. And that's where we all get into trouble. And then once having run into that barrier, that's when they decide that they're going to blow everything up. Yeah. That's the scary piece.
Yeah, it is. KJ, man, I always appreciate you joining me. Thank you for this. KJ, no, just for the audience. He is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He was a contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. That always amazes me that Amazon censors books like this. It is now available at iacenter.org. You can also find KJ on the Breakthrough News Network at the China Report. Definitely check him out. This is only a taste of his brilliance. KJ, thank you.
Just recently, I did a show on the Burning Archive, with Jeff Rich. Yes. And this is about adoption and how adoption is a kind of human trafficking and bioextraction. I think that's, if you're interested in the topic, it's something worth exploring.
Yeah. By the way, he contacted me. Thank you for that. I asked him to come on to the show. So I would love to bring him on for an interview. He was like, he gave me this long thing about I have a PhD and I have all this. Like, dude, you had me at hello. I've seen your show before. So thank you for that. KJ, man, you're fantastic, man. Thank you. You have a good one, okay?
Thank you. You too.
All right. We have come to the end. Apparently, Airbnb got involved. The construction stopped. Thankfully, man, look, as I told you, I consider the show sacred. Maybe not a church, fair enough, but definitely something that we built together. It doesn't exist without you. And I always appreciate you guys joining me. I try, short of me missing a lung, try to drag my ass here to be here in the mornings in order to do this show. And we've been growing. We're nearly at 60K. We have been hitting numbers at like 700, 800. Hell, we had 1,200 the other day on Monday. I mean, just ungodly numbers. At least ungodly for where we started. Where we started was 200, 300 people. Now we're at these numbers. So no, I don't want anything to intercede and to break that up. It aggravates the hell out of me when something does intercede to break that up, especially if it's something that wasn't, let's say, something unpredictable. And life is unpredictable by definition. But, when you're buying an Airbnb, that's a business transaction. And, it boils down to, okay, one of us is going to take the hit. If you would have told me that you were doing construction, I just wouldn't have booked your property. And so now, after a month of me putting up with it, and I know it's like, dude, you leave in 2 days. I get it. But this morning just set me off. It just set me off. And it's like, you can't even concentrate to prepare for the show because what you're hearing is jackhammering over your head on the ceiling as you're preparing for the show. Oh, that should set me off. That should set me off. And when I went to him, it's like, dude, are you being serious right now? How are you doing this in the morning, for one? And two, this was not something that you said anything about. And I sucked it up for the entire month. Without escalating it. And I even went to him and he was like, okay, well, I'll try to keep it from 1 to 4. He did it for 1 day and then it goes right back immediately. And this morning, what set me off was, yeah, man, I can't tell people that they can't work during these hours. So sorry. It's like, okay, so why did you ask me what time I do my show? Right? Like, why even have that conversation with me if that's what's happening right now? Okay, fair enough. Let's have a conversation on Airbnb about it. Let's take this from us talking. Let's escalate this conversation. And he's like, hey, you're writing that on Airbnb. We have nothing else to discuss. We have zero to discuss from here on out. I leave tomorrow. We have nothing else to discuss from here on out. Anything you need to say, you say on Airbnb. Let that shit be aware for everybody. I uploaded the jackhammering, the banging, the hammering, the knocking, the same things that I gave to him over the course of this entire morning. It's fucking outrageous. I just like, it blows me away. Even if I wasn't doing the show, by the way, even if I didn't have the show, that's still fucking outrageous. Just God damn it, man. It's like, for fuck's sake. Dino, oh, dude. Pantilakos, thank you for your continued great daily reports. Hope you have a better day going forward. Yeah, today is going to be packing. Today and tomorrow are basically moving days. Yeah. The property is fantastic. I had no complaints for the entire month up until that shit started. But yeah, it'll be a better day going forward, I suppose. I got to pack, got to clean. Yeah, that's going to be my day. So, guys, I want to thank all of you. Again, thank you for saying for me being late today. That was the reason why I had nothing to do with me in this case. Wanda USA super sticker. Jamal, you should get in contact with YouTuber who goes by Willie O.M. I have no idea who that is, but fair enough. David Nathan, shout out to you, David Nathan. Take care, Jamal. Kuplex, shout out to you, Kuplex. Mohammed Blabbermouth Moranti, what? He has been promising true promises 3 years coming for months and months. It never came. That is true. Meanwhile, Israel is going to destroy Iran. They're not going to destroy Iran before true promise really happens. Look, I will tell you this. A country of 8 million is not going to destroy a country of 80 million. Iran is 3 times the size of Iraq. They're not. And let's be very honest. Part of the reason that Israel wants the U.S. to fight its battles for it is because it will get fucking destroyed by Iran if Iran decides to do so. It's that. It's the reason why they continuously push the U.S. to do it for them. This time around, it looks like the U.S. is trying to create distance and let his rogue actor do some kind of strike on its behalf. I hope Iran blows that shit out the sky. I hope it blows that shit out the sky. That's what I hope. But we'll see. But that said, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. Oh, Willie O.M. is an ex-military guy from Australia. He has a channel that focuses that focuses on Ukraine. He started out on the day of war believing all of the Western propaganda about Russia, but now he's coming around. Oh, is he? He's coming to Jesus, huh? It only took him 3 years to come to Jesus. Fair enough. Welcome to the club. I will tell you this. I have to be honest. I was shocked as shit that the war started. And in the very beginning, I couldn't fully grasp that it's a modern war. Like in the very beginning, it was like, okay, well, they're fighting in Ukraine. Okay, fair enough. People fight other places. And as we got further in, it was like, whoa, they're losing 100,000 people. Like, meaning at a certain point, it's like, okay, this is not just a war. This is a modern war. This is like World War II stuff, where you have these large militaries attacking each other, artillery and everything else. Like when that dawned on me and when that realization finally set in, it's like, oh my God, this is fucking outrageous. I cannot believe we provoked this. Like the notion that we sit back and edge, keep poking and poking and poking. And then the bear finally growls and bites somebody's head off. And it's like, oh my God, I can't believe that bear bit somebody's head off. Yeah, you're fucking poking the bear. For fuck's sake, man. Just fucking just outrageous. Like, we don't care about life. We just don't. And there needs to be a spiritual portion of politics that is not religious, that is not woo-woo, that is none of that. I just mean there needs to be a spiritual component to politics. Like there has to be this idea that life matters, that something is fucking sacred. Otherwise, nothing matters. I'll end it. Look, Mary Ann Williamson, you may call her a quack. You may say all this stuff about Mary Ann Williamson. She has a point. She has a point. And it's something that is lacking in the way we do our affairs. I mean, even honesty at that point doesn't really matter. And you're not honest, or you don't stick to like deals that you make from a country standpoint, or you're not honest in your relations for no reason. You're doing it because the moment that you're dishonest, the other guy has every right to be dishonest in order to balance the scales for the fact that you're dishonest. And at that point, it's just a game of, trying to trick the other person into interaction, at which point nobody believes anybody because everybody's dishonest in their affairs. That is not a way to run the world. That is not even a way to interact as human beings in the way that we engage with each other. We have courts in order to try to figure out what's true, but I'm putting out on the international stage that doesn't exist. If you are untrustworthy, then you won't be trusted. Full stop. And all the propaganda in the world is not going to make that distrust go away. It's just fucking outrageous. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe. You can support this content through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee, Super Stickers, all of those things. They're below at the bottom of the video. You guys make this content what it is. These shows are often demonetized because we talk about issues of war and so forth. YouTube often doesn't like that. So your support deeply helps. I'm going to say you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. I have an interview later today with, fuck is his name? Jesus Christ, his name dropped out of my mind at the last minute. It just dropped out of my mind at the last minute. Where is it? Alex Craner. So he's going to be on today at 1 p.m. He's a fantastic guest. That should be a really good show. He couldn't make it for the morning show, but he was able to make it. Yeah, he was able to make it for this evening. I'm sorry. So there is a company, AI company, that wants me to do a paid collaboration. I am very dubious about paid collaborations, especially for a news channel, because I don't think it necessarily makes sense for the content. It's like you're doing this kind of political content that deals with war, peace, people dying, people being mangled. And then you do a video selling something. It just feels bizarre to me. Look, I'm going to end this. You guys have a fantastic evening. And I'll see you a little bit later in the evening. You all have a good one. Yeah, it's a horrible idea. I don't mess with Ron. It's a horrible idea. Yeah, it is. But ideologues are not governed by good sense. They're not. They're just pariahs. Have a good one, all. Be safe. Money Forum channel. Yeah, I don't think it works for the content. If it was something on video editing, okay, maybe that makes sense. Because since I have to edit videos, if it's on hats, suits, I get it. Maybe even men's grooming, kind of. But this other thing seems just weird to me. You guys have a phenomenal day. I'll see you in a few. I'll see you, what time is it? 10 o'clock, 10:15. I'll see you in about 2 hours, 45 minutes. Have a good one all.